I came home to find my world shattered. My wife, the woman I trusted for 15 years, was tangled in bed with another man. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. In that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. The love of my life had become my worst enemy. Her deceit was relentless, her lies endless. She thought she could get away with it, but she was wrong. Revenge became my only solace. I planned meticulously, ensuring she'd feel the pain she caused me. This isn't just my story, it's a warning. Sarah. The tingling started low in my body and spread all around until I felt it everywhere. I was lying on my side with him behind me. He lifted one of my thick legs to get closer to me. I pushed my body back against him, matching his movements. The soft sounds of our bodies meeting filled the room. His heavy breaths and my soft sounds were almost lost in the slapping noise we made together. "Do it harder," I said. "Come on, give it to me." He was breathing hard like he was very tired. "Come on, Sarah," he said, gasping. "I've already done this 3 times. I'm worn out." "You're only 20, I replied. "Besides, the second time was different. That doesn't count. How does Mr. Miller keep up with you?" he panted. "My husband loves me," I said, serious. "He would push himself to the limit for me if I asked, but I think he is just in better shape than you. He runs a lot. Maybe you should go home and wait for him to finish," he said. "I'm drained. Plus, I have a girlfriend." "You told me she hardly ever wants to," I said. "What are the chances she'll want to tonight?" "Well, your husband will be ready to go all night when he gets home," he said. "If he makes you so happy, why do you need me? Stop it!" I was snapped. I was surprised by my own anger. Dennis makes love to me. What he gives me is special and sweet. He brings me joy without even trying. I love him more than anything. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said. "I didn't mean to upset you." "No, Brad," I replied. "You're right. This has gone on too long. You reminded me of what I forgot." "What are you saying, Sarah?" he asked. "Don't take it too seriously. I'm just tired. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." "Brad, I love my husband. You were just a distraction. Sometimes I feel old and not my best. Sometimes I want a little fun without any strings, or to try something different, you know? But I've been feeling strange lately. It's time to stop." I told him. An hour later, I was home. I looked around my house and smiled. My life was good. I wondered why I ever wanted anything more. I took a shower and cleaned up. I wanted to make tonight special for Dennis. I had to hurry. He would be home in about an hour, and if I was already fresh when he got here, your car is so much fun to drive. It feels like all I have to do is think about what I wanted to do, said my 16-year-old daughter, Chelsea. "Can I drive your car when I take my test next week?" she asked. "Anything for you, sweetheart?" he replied. "Frankie is going to be so jealous," Chelsea said, bouncing into the kitchen to grab a bag of chips and a soda. "Chelsea, no snacks," I told her. "Mom, I want to eat with Daddy. And he's going out for a run first," she said. Dennis went straight upstairs without coming to see me, which was unusual. A few minutes later, I heard him come back down and leave the house. I knew he was heading to the local park where there were running trails and a track. About an hour later, he returned and went straight to the shower. After that, he got something to eat and went out to the garage. One of our neighbors came over, and they worked on the Mustang. I finished cleaning the kitchen and then went to our room. I watched TV for a couple of hours while waiting for him to come to bed. He peeked in after his shower and said he would be in later because he needed to do something on the computer. I pulled the blanket off and showed him my new outfit. "That color is nice," he said. I felt really upset. "You can stay on that computer all night, Dennis," I said angrily. "Fine. I will," he replied. I had no idea what was wrong between us. This felt so different, and I couldn't understand it. For the rest of the week, we barely talked, and Dennis seemed okay with that. On Friday, I went to the doctor and got the biggest surprise. I was pregnant. This couldn't be happening again. Our son is 20 years old and in college, and our daughter, who is Daddy's favorite, is 16 and about to leave home in a year and a half. At 39 years old, I thought I was done raising kids. I figured the baby was made when Dennis and I visited his parents' cabin in the mountains. At fresh mountain air always seems to have an effect on me. Both Chelsea and her brother were conceived in that cabin. Dennis, my husband and a great dad, would step up when he found out we were having another baby. I waited eagerly for him to come home. I was sure my news would cheer him up. As I thought about it, I remembered times in the past when we faced challenges like this. The last time was at a car event a couple of years ago. He found out that his motor was outdated. All the newer Mustangs with the 5.0 motors were using a 4-volt system. Even though his car was more powerful than most, it had an old 3-volt motor, so many new parts wouldn't fit it. He sulked like a little kid for almost a month before telling me he needed to buy a new car to feel better. I asked him how much he thought he would get for trading in the old car, and he looked at me like I had ruined his breakfast. Dennis had a crazy idea that I would never agree to. He wanted to fix up our small garage or make it bigger into a 3-car garage. Then he would buy another Mustang and keep his old one. He thought he could fit another car in the future. I told him he was out of his mind. "Dennis, we have 2 kids to send to college." I reminded him, "You can't just buy cars. You have 2 choices. Choice A is to trade in your Mustang for a new one. Choice B is to grow up and appreciate the car you have. Keep wanting the newest things all the time. You admire vintage Mustangs. Well, part of being vintage is that they get older. As long as you love your car, that's what matters." He pouted for another 2 weeks, but finally decided to keep his car because he loved it too much. I thought the news of the baby would cheer him up. When he came home, I could hardly wait to tell him my news, but he stopped to bring Chelsea home too. "Daddy, I could have beaten that guy," Chelsea whined. "It was just a Honda, and that cowboy driving it was all show and no go. That would have gotten you your first ticket." Said Dennis, "You didn't even see the police car behind the Burger Queen. That cowboy might have wanted a ticket, but you can't drive yet." "Dad, I want this car," Chelsea said seriously. "You wanted to trade your car before. This is your chance." "Chelsea, I'm not giving a 500-horsepower Mustang to a 16-year-old girl," he replied. I could see his face change, so I knew he was about to give in. He hated to see our kids unhappy. Chelsea had been getting her waist, and she was a baby. "Chelsea, I really love my car." He started. "I don't need a new one. Maybe we could make a family tradition. How about we get you your own Mustang? The same color as yours?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "But it has to be a V6, he said, trying to sound strong. She frowned and nodded her head like she had just eaten something really yucky. "Convertible," she added. "Used," he replied, stretching out his hand. "Certified used," she said as they shook hands. "We can start looking online tomorrow," he said, "and we'll do some test drives on Friday afternoon." "I love you, Dad," she said, hugging him. It felt like watching her pet her puppy after it learned a new trick. I was sure my daughter would get what she wanted. And I was right just a moment later. "Chelsea, you can have a new car if you really want one," he said. Her saying she loved him made him even softer. "Dad, we already made a deal," she called back as she skipped up the stairs. "Plus, the new ones are not nice looking." I could hardly stop myself from laughing. My 16-year-old daughter, who didn't even have a driver's license yet, had convinced her dad to buy her a Mustang. I needed Chelsea on my side, but I didn't really need her help. The new baby would make sure I got treated well. For the next 8 months or so, I would feel like a queen. Also, Dennis and Chelsea were very close. Getting her to support anyone except her dad was hard, like trying to stop the sun from shining. While I was lost in my thoughts, Dennis went upstairs. He was probably getting ready for his run. Another hour wouldn't change anything about my news. 2 hours later, Dennis had returned from his run and taken a shower. I could hear Chelsea upstairs in her room singing loudly. I was sure that with how she argued, she could be a great lawyer someday, but she would never be a pop star. Dennis was at the computer again, and when I looked over his shoulder, I saw he was looking at houses. I smiled. "Sweetheart, I know we said now might be a good time to downsize with the kids going to college soon. We don't need such a big house anymore," I told him. "But things have changed, Dad. I'm pregnant again." I thought he would be shocked. I thought he would jump up to hug me or just stare in surprise. What I didn't expect was for him to calmly move on to the next house on his list as if I hadn't said anything. "Dennis, don't you have anything to say?" I asked louder this time. "I was just trying to think through all the details and possibilities," he said. "But there's one thing I'm curious about because it's really important." "What are you curious about, honey?" I asked. I thought he was joking with me. I thought he would pick me up and hug me. He turned around and looked me in the eye. His face looked flat. The man I had loved for most of my life was looking at me with no warmth, like something he was thinking about replacing. He looked at me like I was just a part he could toss aside. Then he spoke, and it was the worst thing I had ever heard. "I was wondering if the baby is mine or Brad's," he said. "That changes everything." "Huh?" I replied. My mind felt blank. I couldn't think straight. "Who?" I asked, feeling confused. "Brad Johnson. You know, the college guy you've been seeing for the last few weeks. We live in a small town, Sarah. No matter how careful you are, someone will see you," he said. I stood there barely able to stay upright. When I found out, I knew we were done. I started planning my life without you. I moved some money around to make it easier for the kids and to reduce how much we have. I did it for 2 reasons. First, I wanted to make sure our kids are okay financially. Second, I wanted to reduce how much money I would have to give you, he explained. I felt so many things in that moment. I wanted to reach out to him, to have him hold me and tell me everything would be okay. I wanted to say something, but my mouth wouldn't work. Even if it did, I didn't know what to say. "Of course, your baby is probably not mine," he said confidently. "Our time together has been fading. I've tried every excuse to keep my distance, and when we were together, I didn't finish inside you. I pretended like women have done for years. Apparently, you were wrong when you said you felt me, but I started. You probably remember other things," he said, "but it was better this way. It's a good thing you found out. It means I don't have to deal with you any longer than I have to." "You don't get it," I said. "It meant nothing." "It was. I don't care," he replied. "I'm not interested in why you did it. If you were bored or wanted someone else, you could have told me. You could have given me a chance to win you back, but you didn't. That shows you were just tired of me." "No, you have it wrong," I said. "There are clearly 2 sides to this story," he replied. "You can believe whatever you want, but I need to see real proof. You know each other for over 20 years, he said. "You've always said you know me better than anyone." "I do," I answered. "So you must have known what would happen when I found out, right?" he asked. "I never thought you'd find out." I said, "Dennis, I love you. This was a mistake. We all make mistakes. I'd do anything for you." "Okay, drop dead," he said. "That would make things a lot cheaper and a lot easier." "Anything but that," I replied. "Then just sign the divorce papers when they come tomorrow," he said. "What divorce papers?" I asked, shocked. "Who said anything about a divorce?" "Dennis, this isn't a reason for something permanent," I insisted. "We can work this out. I promise I'll never do it again." "That's how I feel about being with you," he said. "And since I don't want to live the rest of my life without someone else, we both need to find other partners. All around here seem to think I'm a good guy, and I want to be with someone I'm with. Nice women don't date married men." "We can fix this," I said. "In a few years, it will feel like it never happened." "No, it won't," he replied. "I'm older than Brad, but so are you. We're not old enough to think about forgetfulness, so I won't forget this. I can't trust you again. I think it's best if we go our separate ways." "No, I'll fight this," I told him firmly. "I'm going to let you stay in the house until Chelsea goes off to college," he said. "If I end up with custody of her, I'll move back in and you'll have to find somewhere else to go. The moment you get and sign the divorce papers, you will get a check for half of what we've built together. That should be enough for you to live on until your boyfriend finishes school." "Honestly, I don't care what the law says," he continued. "I'm giving you half of everything we have. You can keep your car, but you will need to keep making the payments. I will not pay you any support. After all, it's your choices that broke our marriage. You should be paying me, but all I want is for you to leave. I will continue to support our daughter and son. I found out they are my kids. I have set up accounts for both of them. Their college is paid for and they have extra money saved. You, though, have enough money to live on for a few years, but you need to find a job. Maybe you could become a therapist or work in some other job. If you try to take me to court for more money, it will show me that you didn't really love me. You just wanted the money. Then I would disappear. With my skills, I can get a job anywhere. Changing my name is cheaper than paying for someone who betrays me. Before I leave, I could share videos of you with Brad online and let everyone know. By Sunday, you'd be famous around here, or you can take the money you're getting, stay here in the house, or get your own place and live your life. We can both be happy. We can both live here with pride. We'll just say that things didn't work out. We grew apart. If we bump into each other, we'll just smile and move on. Or maybe we won't smile. "Jamie, come in and sit down, Jamie," she said. I walked in and took the chair she pointed to. I didn't know why I was called to her office. "Jamie, do you like it here?" she asked while looking at some papers. "Yes, ma'am." "I do," I replied. "I've been working hard to show that." "Yes, Jamie, you have," she said. "You are good at your job. But it's your people's skills that I want to talk about. Let's get to the point. Half of our staff thinks you are wonderful. The other half thinks you are awful. No one complies, everyone, ma'am," I said. "Sometimes people just don't get along. Wow, I hoped for a quick and easy. I'll do my best to get along, ma'am, but this seems more complicated. I don't want to push you, Jaime, but are you a lesbian?" "No, ma'am," I answered quickly and maybe too strongly. "Jamie, there's nothing wrong with that if you are," she said. "It wouldn't change your work here. We really don't mind." "I'm not, ma'am," I insisted. "Have you ever been hurt?" she asked. "No, not at all," I said. "Were you in a bad relationship?" she asked. "No, ma'am," I replied. "Jamie," she said softly, "why do you dislike men?" 2 hours later, I was still upset from the talk. I liked my job, and honestly, I didn't hate men. I just didn't trust them. Men could be messy, unkind, and dishonest. They would take your heart and leave you hurt. I had promised my boss to find something to help me relax and deal with my anger. I remembered how much I liked walking in the woods with my aunt when I was young. I had heard walking was good exercise, so I put on my sneakers and went to the park near my house where there was a nice path. Being in nature felt so peaceful. The sun and the gentle fall breeze lifted my mood. By the time I got back to my car, I felt much better. I even left my phone in the car so I wouldn't be disturbed. As soon as I sat down, my phone rang, looking at the screen. All the peace I had worked for that day faded away. "Hi, ma'am," I said. "Wow, you sound like you're walking to your own funeral," she said. "Do you dislike talking to family so much?" I didn't answer. I knew she would keep talking. "Are you coming home for your dad's birthday?" she asked. After that, the conversation went downhill. My mom reminded me how close my dad and I used to be. She tried to make me feel guilty when I told her I really wanted to be at his party, but I had to work. I explained that my work was more important, so I wouldn't be going to the party even though I wanted to. Feeling upset, I headed back home. I had been living there for 6 months, but it still didn't feel like home to me. I had never met my neighbors, and to be honest, many of my things were still packed in boxes. I couldn't say why I hadn't unpacked yet. Maybe that was why my place felt more like a storage room than a home. Sarah, 2 weeks ago, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. It wasn't because of how I looked, I'm just average. I mean, I look nice enough, but only my husband really thinks I'm amazing. I have curves, but many women do too. When I was younger, guys liked very thin women. Now they seem to prefer women with curves. I feel like I won the lottery in 2 ways. First, I was slimmer in my teens and 20s. After having a couple of kids, I never lost the extra weight. I weigh about 150 pounds, and I have big boobs and a curvy backside. The second way I hit the jackpot was marrying Dennis. He is the kindest man I know. He loves me no matter how I look. He always says what he wants the most is for me to be happy. I guess everyone wants more, even when they have a lot. I had what I wanted, but I still wanted something else. Maybe it was a midlife crisis. Maybe I was feeling changes in my life, or maybe I was just being vain. There comes a time in a woman's life, usually in her late teens or early 20s, when she realizes she can have almost anything she wants. She knows that many men will do almost anything to get her attention. She finds out that by wearing tight shorts and a low-cut top, all the men will look at her, but it doesn't really mean much. She doesn't have to be super pretty or fit, not often think about one thing, and if they see a chance, they act silly to get it. Women get used to having that kind of power, but one day it fades away. One day she realizes she is invisible, even to men. At first it didn't bother me. I didn't even notice it at first. I would visit friends and see that their sons hardly paid attention to me. I tried to playfully tease them, but it didn't matter. I wasn't feeling attractive anymore. My husband still loved me very much. I could catch his attention just by wearing jeans and a comfy sweatshirt. All I had to do was lean forward. It didn't matter which way I was facing. Dennis would get excited, but still, it didn't feel special. He was my husband, so I knew he found me beautiful. Then one day, something unexpected happened. I was working in the yard when I heard the doorbell ring. I opened the door, and there was a delivery guy. It was Brad. I remembered him because he was older than my son and had helped him with football plays during high school. As we talked and I signed for the package, I noticed that he was staring at my chest. As he looked, I could feel myself getting nervous. "Brad, you're staring," I said, breaking the silence. "Wow, I wish my girlfriend had," he mumbled. I don't think he realized I could hear him. "Big boobs," I said for him. He nodded. "I meant to say a body like yours," he replied. "When you bent down for the box, I almost what?" I giggled. "Ruined my shorts," he said. "Well, you can go home tonight and have fun with your girlfriend," I laughed. I felt good in that moment. I could feel a little excitement, too. He just chuckled at what I said. "What's so funny?" I asked. "What you just said," he said. "I'd be lucky to get any once a month, and even when I do, it feels awkward. My girlfriend just lies there like she's so special, when I have to act nice for the next few weeks, but I thought, I started. That people in their 20s were having lots of fun," he said. "Everyone tells me I'm lucky, but none of them are with a good girl. Mary wants people to think she's perfect, so she gives me just enough to keep me interested. The bad part is that many younger women don't really know how to enjoy being close. It's funny. Many guys think they're lucky to be with a pretty girl, but often it feels like a burden. Many girls can choose any guy. They don't need to work for it. Girls who aren't as pretty might be more willing to share a good time. They've usually had enough experiences to enjoy it too. Mary and I have been together since she turned 18. It took me about a year to be close with her. She was 19 and acted like it was a big deal. We were already engaged, but she acted like we committed a huge mistake. We've been together for 3 years now. We plan to get married next year when I finish school, and I have never had oral pleasure from her. I hope your husband knows how lucky he is." There was a long pause, and then I pulled him inside the house. We got so caught up in each other that I didn't even remember to close the front door. Anyone could have walked in and seen us on the couch. I told myself it was just a mistake, a one-time thing. I thought it was a moment of craziness making me feel desired by someone who wasn't Dennis, someone younger. I promised myself it would never happen again. Everyone makes mistakes, right? I thought Dennis would understand, since it had only happened once in our 20-plus years together. I told myself that a brief affair wasn't worth ending our strong marriage. I knew there would be hard times ahead, but I believed we could work things out. All of this was true only if Dennis did not find out. When he came home that night, he was as loving and happy as always. I tried to be the best wife, but about a week later, Brad showed up, and when I saw the look in his eyes, I knew we were going to be together again. It took 7 weeks for me to stop seeing him. Unfortunately, the day I decided to end it was also the day Dennis found out. I was totally wrong about how he would react. He seemed to shut off all his feelings for me. He treated our relationship like a math problem, and he was very skilled at solving them. He wouldn't even talk about counseling or trying to fix things. When I got a lawyer, Dennis told him that if he wanted to get paid, he should accept the divorce. There was no chance for us to reconcile, so counseling wouldn't help. If there were any efforts to delay the divorce, Dennis would just walk out. If he left, he would ruin everything. He would make me broke and damage my good name. We moved quickly, and everything was settled in less than 2 weeks after he confronted me. He was still in shock, trying to figure out how to cope. Things did not turn out as either of us had hoped. Dennis agreed to pay me alimony, but only for a year. After that, I would be on my own. He would also give me child support for Chelsea, but only until she started college. That is when things went downhill for Dennis. We both fought hard for custody of Chelsea, and she was very clear with the judge that she wanted to live with her dad. Dennis hadn't found a new house yet. He was taking him longer to buy one than it took for us to get a divorce. Since Chelsea stayed with me, I received child support along with my alimony. In a year and a half, when Chelsea went to college, I had to leave the house. That house belonged to Dennis's family, and he wouldn't sell it to me. He told me I couldn't stay there a day longer than Chelsea did. Dennis finally found a house he liked and was renting it. Chelsea said it was a nice place and a good neighborhood. Dennis had generous visiting rights, and Chelsea started setting up her room there as soon as he began to furnish it. Dennis was also going to pay me child support for a new baby if it turned out to be his. I made an appointment to confirm paternity early in the pregnancy. My future depended on that baby. If it wasn't Dennis's child, my life would change completely. Just as fast as Dennis handed me the broom, Brad pulled away from me even quicker. For almost 2 months, I had convinced myself that my fling with Brad was only physical, but I thought it was more to him. I learned how wrong I was when I went to tell Brad I was pregnant and that there was a small chance he could be the father. I waited for him after work. He acted like he didn't know me. He was with some coworkers, and I thought maybe he couldn't talk to personal visitors at work. I decided to wait until his friends left. "Who was that older woman you were just speaking to?" one of his coworkers asked. "Oh, she's just a family friend," Brad replied. "It's kind of creepy how she always comes to say hi." "Well, she's got a big butt and nice curves," said his friend, "but she's so old she probably can't move." I thought Brad would say something nice or change the topic, but instead he joined in. "Her looks probably went downhill a long time ago," he said. "I wouldn't want to be with her. She has to be nearly 50. That's just wrong." I felt tears in my eyes, realizing how foolish I had been. I reminded myself that my affair with Brad was a short mistake and that we weren't supposed to have feelings involved, but hearing him talk about me like I was some old woman hurt deeply. What stung even more was how he was too ashamed to admit we were together. From listening to him, I also figured out that Brad was cheating on his fiancée with at least 2 other women. Those women were closer to his age, and he spoke about them nicely. But it seemed like a brief slip for me was just clever game playing for him. Brad really liked my body and wanted to be with me, and he got his wish. I was feeling low and didn't think I was attractive, so I gave in to him easily. I ended up ruining a good marriage to a man who truly cared for me. Brad didn't care about me. He only wanted to be with me for a short time. When I finally reached out to tell him about the baby, it wasn't just what he said. It was the harsh way he said it that hurt me. "It's not mine," he said right away. "Get an abortion. I'll pay for half, but don't tell anyone it might be my kid." I thought older women were supposed to know better. I went home and cried. Neither Dennis nor Chelsea could help. Chelsea looked at me angrily before going to a friend's house for dinner. Dennis saw me and went to the garage in his car, though I noticed tears in his eyes. I couldn't believe how much I had hurt him for no reason. At night, Dennis drove around until he found Brad at a bar with some friends. Dennis walked in, bought a drink, took a big sip of it, and spat it right in Brad's face. Brad wasn't foolish. He made excuses to leave with his friends laughing at him. The bouncers tried to hold Dennis back so Brad could escape. They held him until Brad got in his car and drove away. But in our small town, it didn't take long for Dennis to find Brad's parents' house, where he caught Brad sitting on the porch. Dennis hit Brad hard enough that he broke the railing on the porch and sent him into his mother's garden. Brad jumped up and fell on Dennis, and they started fighting. Brad's parents tried to help him, but he got hurt badly and had to go to the hospital. His mom took him to urgent care while his dad talked to Dennis. Dennis called the police himself and went to the station to turn himself in. Brad's parents didn't press charges, and the sheriff let Dennis go. He bought a new railing for Brad's parents and a 6-pack of beer. Dennis and Brad's dad fixed the porch together. Strangely, reporters from our small-town newspaper started to uncover the story. Dennis kept his promise and never told anyone, but little things got out. The news of my divorce, my pregnancy, my DNA test, and Dennis leaving me along with Dennis fighting Brad made everyone talk. It only got worse day by day. Tomorrow, Dennis is moving into a rental house. Chelsea and many of our friends are helping him. I decided to make a nice dinner for all of us, so I went to the supermarket. I felt many eyes on me as I walked through the store. People were staring and frowning while shopping. I picked the checkout lane with the shortest line, hoping for a quick finish. I was almost next when I saw that my cashier was Mary, Brad's girlfriend. As I got closer, I could see how beautiful she was. I could hear whispers all around, and everyone was watching us as I stood in front of her. When she looked up, one tear slipped down her face. With a strength that surprised me, she started to ring up my groceries. Everyone in the store watched as Mary scanned my items. More tears fell as she worked. I looked around and felt worse with every stare. I felt terrible. "Mary, I'm really sorry," I said, my voice shaky. "No, you're not," she replied softly. "You're only sorry that you got caught, but I feel sorry for your husband. He's a good man and didn't deserve this. He loved you so much and you hurt him badly. I even feel sorry for your daughter. She has just over a year left at school and will be judged because of you. No matter how well she does, people will always compare her to you. I was foolish to trust Brad. I almost married him. I wanted the love you have, the kind that lasts forever. I wanted someone who would care for me and our children like you, Sarah, but now I'm glad I'm not you. I could never hurt someone who loves me the way you hurt Dennis. And I hope that baby you are carrying is Brad's. Dennis needs a chance at happiness with someone else, and he shouldn't have to be tied to you for the next 18 years. If that baby has to change someone's life, I hope it's Brad's. I hope the two of you feel the pain for what you did to us. Was it worth it, Sarah? Once she finished, everyone in the store started clapping for her. Once then, Ernest Truth, the owner of the store, came over as I took out my credit card to pay. "Sarah," he said as I opened my wallet, "your groceries are free today." I thought he wanted to soften the blow after Mary spoke to me. "It's okay, Ernest," I replied. "She can say what she thinks." "She's right, though," he said. "I've had a lot of complaints from customers about you shopping here. I have to ask you to leave Sarah. This store is privately owned and I own it. Because of the complaints, I need you to take your groceries and walk out. You're no longer welcome in my store." "But I've always shopped here," I protested. "It's the only grocery store in town. The next town is only 10 miles away," he said. "Thanks to your husband working hard, you have a nice car." He turned away from me and the others in the store cheered. I felt like crying, but I looked at the angry faces around me and decided not to let them see my tears. I drove home, crying while I made dinner. I tried to prepare Dennis's favorite meal. When he came home from work, I asked him to sit down and eat with me one last time since he was moving out the next day. I thought it was the saddest day since I met him. We sat across from each other, not looking at each other and moving food around on our plates. "How is everything with the baby?" he asked. "It's our baby, Dennis," I replied sharply. "That is still unclear," he said calmly. "But honestly, I don't think it is." "Have you given up being an engineer to become a mind reader?" I asked. "Maybe I always was one," he said with a small smile. It was the first time I saw him smile in weeks. "I probably should have told you this before," he continued, "but I always had a feeling before you told me. When we were having Frank, I felt different. It was our first time, and I sensed something was off. When we were having Chelsea, I was the one who told you to take a test. I felt it again then, but I didn't feel anything strange about you. I felt our daughter. So you're saying you can tell this baby isn't yours?" I asked. "I never said that," he replied. "I just don't feel anything this time. Maybe it's because we aren't connected anymore. Or Dennis, you're wrong," I cried. "I love you just as much as ever. I made a mistake. I was foolish and did something really stupid, but it didn't mean anything. Trust me, I'm paying for it. Most of my friends don't talk to me anymore. I guess I'm not welcome at the store now. You and Brad will have to shop somewhere else," he said. "It's not a big deal, Sarah. Just don't bring him here anymore," he warned. "You can be with him anywhere else. I'm only letting you stay here for Chelsea. If I find out he's been here, Dennis, I don't see Brad anymore," I sobbed. "He acts like he doesn't know me and says bad things about me to his friends. He tells them I'm some crazy old woman who won't leave him alone. But a lot of people in town know what really happened. I can see it in their eyes when I'm at the store. Well, once you get further along in the pregnancy, you and Brad will be together again. I'm sure he'll want to be a part of his child's life," he replied. "Dennis, he says it's not his baby. He told me to end the pregnancy," I said. A flash of anger appeared on his face but quickly disappeared. "You can't force him to be good, Dennis," I said. "His parents are nice people," he replied. "They'll teach him to do the right thing. Dennis, I want this baby to have the same kind of life that Frankie and Chelsea had," I said. "That's up to you and Brad," he said. "What if this baby is yours?" I asked. "Why should he suffer because of my mistakes? If it's my child, I'll try to be part of his life," he said. "Dennis, I'm serious. You have to promise me," I said. "A baby can start to learn even before they're born. Remember how you talked to Chelsea before she arrived? You spent so much time touching my belly and telling her all about her life and how much love she'd have. You need to promise me you'll support this baby the same way. I promise if it's my child, I'll do everything you want until they're old enough to understand why things are like this," he said. I felt relieved because that meant he would stay with me until the baby grew up. "You have to promise something, too," he said. "I promise I won't cheat on you again," I said. "Not that," he replied. "You need to promise that if it's not my child, you'll let me go and move on with my life. Dennis, I'm really sorry, but I can't agree to that. I told him even 10 years from now, if you've moved on and married someone else, I'd still go after you. If you were with my sister and had kids, I would still try to be with you. I love you too much. Brothers filled my eyes and I could barely talk. He softened and pulled me into his arms. I love you too, Sarah, he said. Part of me always will. But I wish what happened had been a mistake just once. I think we could have gotten through it if it was only a single time, but you did it many times. You knew what you were doing, and you must have understood there would be results. I struggled to grasp his words. It felt like ages since I had been held by my husband. I felt so happy. I sighed and held him even tighter. I felt warm inside, and I didn't wear a bra, hoping moments like this could happen. His arms began to rub my back, and I felt lightheaded. I sensed him holding me up tighter. His hands rested on my lower back. I pressed myself against him even closer. I wanted him at that moment more than anything else. I needed him to be close to me to show me that he still cared for me. "Sarah, what are you doing?" he asked. "Can't we just be together one last time?" I asked. "It doesn't mean you want to be together again as much as I do. We can just be two adults dealing with our feelings. You know how I feel when I'm pregnant. You can come over whenever you want. I've never said no to you, Dennis. I won't start now. You can come by every day and every night. It doesn't have to mean anything, just—" "That's the issue," he replied. "Maybe that's why we aren't right for each other anymore. Because for me, it does mean something. Sarah, being with you has always felt special to me. It always means something. I'm not like you. I can't be close to someone just for fun. It's too personal. I cared for you too much to do that." Suddenly, I realized I had lost him. There was no hope for us, and I knew I didn't deserve him anymore. I had taken something beautiful and messed it up. Even if the baby turned out to be his, our relationship would never be the same. He would never look at me the same way again. The way he looked at me had changed. My daughter was upset with me. She thought it was my fault she couldn't live with her dad, but it was the court's choice. Yes, I wanted her with me, knowing Dennis would want to be near her. But the judge made the decision. I also remember the day her brother found out what was happening. It was the first day in 2 years that he didn't call or text me back while he was away at school. Since that day, I hadn't heard from him at all. I had broken my family and had nothing good left. Everything depended on my baby's paternity. It was a lot of weight to place on such small shoulders. I smiled about it because even if Dennis wanted to escape from me, he never could. It felt like I was risking my future and my family. But the odds seemed in my favor. Dennis had been with me many times over the years. It had only been with me a few times, and we used protection. I still remember how he complained about having to take the used condoms with him because I was worried about Dennis finding them. The chances of it being Brad's baby were very low. "Let me know when they have the DNA results," Dennis said as he headed to the door. "What?" I asked. "Dennis, they can't even do the test for 3 more weeks. What do I do until then?" "Figure out your next move," he said. "You're getting ready for your baby. Fix things with Chelsea. Find someone new. I think they call that having a life. Listen, Sarah, I'm going through a lot too. It would be easy to pull you close and pretend none of this happened. It hurts so much when I think of you at my place. I regret what happened. I wish it had never happened. I wish our family was still together. I wish the hardest choice I had to make was where to go on vacation next. But you caused this. The rest of us never got to decide anything. You did this, Sarah, so don't ask me for help. I'm still dealing with my own hurt from this. I don't even know how I will find the strength to help the kids through it. You will have to fix your own life this time. As I said before, I thought that was the worst time of my life. But I was wrong. The next 3 weeks were like a bad dream. I couldn't sleep. I turned over all night. I reached out for Dennis, wondering where he was. Then I would remember and cry hard. Once, I made the mistake of going to my daughter Chelsea's room. I thought maybe we both felt lonely and I really needed a hug. Her reaction shocked me. She sat up in her bed looking at me like I was strange. "Chelsea, we both miss your dad," I said. "I don't miss him," she shouted. "I just talked to him. He picks me up from school every day and I'm spending the weekend with him. Maybe if you hadn't pushed him away, you wouldn't miss him either." "But Chelsea," I cried. "Do you know how hard this is for me?" she asked. "What you did is what everyone in town is talking about. Half of them think I'll end up like you. Go back to your room, Mom. On days when I felt really bad, I did things I'm not proud of. I called his phone and hung up when he answered, and I followed him. After being together for over 20 years, I knew where he was most of the time. I drove to his work and watched him go in. I came back at lunch and saw him eat with some coworkers. I got really mad when I saw a woman with him. She was about my age and looked a lot like me. It would really hurt me if Dennis left me for someone who looked like me. If he liked me that much, why not give me another chance instead of going for a copy? I felt terrible when they came back. I was ready to confront them when I noticed the woman was holding hands and kissed one of the other men. I also saw that Dennis wasn't paying attention to her. I drove home, telling myself I was just being silly. A couple of hours later, I jumped up and ran to the window when I heard his car. As usual, he had picked Chelsea up from school. She got out, hugged her dad, and went into the house while he drove off. He didn't even look at the house. Every day I missed him more. Everything I did reminded me of what I had lost. When I went into town, the way people looked at me only made me feel worse. I had to go to a market in the next town. The punishment I got was much worse than any joy I found in my mistake. I went through it alone. People made fun of me, but Brad seemed to get off easy. Everyone laughed at him and patted him on the back after what he did. He lost his nice girlfriend, but she quickly found someone new. And honestly, Brad wasn't ready to settle down anyway. So from where I stood, I was the only one hurting for what had happened. Chelsea said Dennis was sad too. I just didn't get why, if we were both suffering, we couldn't help each other out. 3 weeks passed. Those were 3 long weeks where I sank deeper into sadness and things hit rock bottom. I decided to call Dennis. "Hi, Dennis. It's me," I said. "Are you surprised to hear from me?" "I'm just surprised you stayed on the line long enough to talk instead of hanging up right away," he replied. I started. "Sarah, before you lied to me again, remember they have caller ID," he said. "Okay," I admitted. "I might have called you a few times, but I have never lied to you. Sarah, that's in the past, but I remember you saying you loved me. You promised to be mine and not anyone else," he said. "But Dennis," I started to cry. "Why did you call Sarah?" he asked. His voice was calmer now, not as angry as before. It felt like he had accepted we were done and was trying to move on. That made my heart ache, knowing he wanted to forget me like I was a wrong answer on a test. "Going straight to the point, huh, Dennis?" I said. "Just like we're strangers now. No friendly hellos or asking how I am, just straight to it, like I'm a salesperson or something." "How are you, Sarah?" he asked. There was no sarcasm in his voice. He really seemed to care. "I'm really unhappy," I told him. "I feel like an outcast. Everyone is talking about me, but no one speaks to me. I'm lonely, and this is the hardest pregnancy ever. It's not fun to have a baby all alone. Where were you when I needed you? I remember you rubbing my belly and talking to the baby. Now no one does that, and your daughter doesn't like me. We both know the only reason she's still living with me is because the court said she had to." I sighed, letting out a big breath. Just telling someone what I was going through lifted my spirits a little. It was strange that the only person who would listen to me was the one I had hurt the most. "How are you?" I asked, feeling bad that I hadn't asked before. "Not good," he replied. "People won't leave me alone. They're all trying to help me, but I just need some time to think about what I did wrong, and everyone seems to want to set me up with someone. I didn't know there were so many women in town. Even some of your friends who never talk to me are calling and asking me out, but I'll get over it." "What do you need?" Tomorrow this all ends," I said. Honestly, I was really mad to hear that some of my so-called friends were trying to date my husband, and it felt like I was about to explode. "Tomorrow I'll get the DNA test results, and maybe you can start taking care of me like you said you would. I'll call you as soon as I leave the doctor's office. Don't worry, I'll meet you there," he said. "I knew you wanted to be part of our baby's life," I said, feeling excited. "Sorry to spoil the moment," he replied, "but the real reason I want to be there is that I just don't trust you enough to take your word for it." I know it sounds bad, but I'm being honest. I nodded, a tear rolling down my cheek. It was hard to hear that. Dennis had said before that he didn't trust me, but this felt much worse. The next day we met at my doctor's office. She was smiling and pulled out a big envelope. She put on her glasses and looked at the report. Her smile faded as she looked up at us. My stomach dropped like I was about to be sick. "There's no easy way to say this," she said. "Sarah, Dennis isn't the father. I have to give Dennis credit." When I fainted, he caught me and stopped me from hitting my head on the hard desk we were sitting at. When I came to, he was still holding me. "You probably won't believe this," he said, "but I really am sorry, Sarah." He helped me sit up in the chair. The doctor gave me something to drink, and Dennis held my hand. "I wish you all the best, Sarah," he said. "You're a great mom. You've been through this before. You'll be okay." Then Dennis left. When he moved out of the house, it felt like someone had pulled my heart right out of my chest. That day, it was like someone had thrown a heavy stone into the deep, open wound. Jamie. I didn't realize that my life was about to change. It seemed like just another Saturday morning. My plans weren't set in stone. They were more like notes written in pencil. I would wake up around 10, 11, no, maybe 1 o'clock. Then I'd go for a long walk in the nearby woods to clear my mind of all the stress from the week. I hoped I would not get any annoying calls from my mom or anyone else. I just wanted a calm weekend to relax. But then, at 9 in the morning, I heard loud banging and a very noisy vroom sound. I pulled my pillow over my head and tried to sleep again, but the noise wouldn't stop. It was as loud as if they were building a road right outside my house. I was angrier than I had ever been with my mom. My peaceful, quiet weekend was ruined. I slipped on a robe to cover myself and thought about how mad I was. Someone was going to hear about this. One of my stupid neighbors was about to face my anger. I opened my door and stepped onto my little porch. In front of my house was a big moving van. At least 8 men were carrying shiny furniture into the house next door. There were also 2 or 3 smaller trucks from furniture and electronics stores lined up down the street, waiting to unload. The men were busy working quickly. My irritation grew as I looked around. Then I saw him. He drove up in a shiny black Mustang GT. The car was heavily customized. It looked very expensive and new, even more than my own Mustang. The usual black plastic front had been replaced with shiny metal parts. The rims were black chrome and very large. The tires looked brand new or very well cared for. Honestly, I had not been taking care of my car like I should have. "Breakfast, guys!" he shouted happily. The drivers and movers quickly ran over to the house and sat on the stairs and porch to eat the food he brought. I almost laughed when I saw what he called breakfast. There were big boxes of donuts, bags of McDonald's sandwiches, bottles of orange or apple juice, and even some cases of beer. One by one, they each grabbed a sandwich, a few donuts, and a can of beer or 2. I was shocked. These were not kids. They were all grown men. They gathered on the porch drinking beer and eating donuts. Who does that? Who drinks beer with donuts? I noticed they all looked different and had various body types. Very few were wearing the clothes of moving or sales companies. That meant most of these guys were just his friends. I looked again and saw that I recognized some of the guys. A few of them lived on my street. One guy was bouncing around like a cheerful chipmunk, making sure everyone was eating and having fun. It just made me even angrier. How could he bring so many men to my house? I glanced around and noticed some neighbors on their porches. That made me feel better. At least I wasn't the only one annoyed by this noisy gathering on a calm Sunday morning. Then I noticed something that made me smile a little. The woman who lived across the street, who was quite big, was heading over. Her lazy husband was following behind her. She looked determined and started searching for someone among the guys on the porch. Her eyes landed on the Mustang guy, and she marched right up to him. "Dennis, you were supposed to call me when you got here," she shouted. He sat down his sandwich and came over to her. Even though he was smaller than she was, he hugged her tightly and lifted her off the ground. She squealed like a young girl. "Put me down, you fool," she squealed. "I don't want these guys trying to look at me." I noticed that none of the men even saw her. They were too busy with their beer and donuts, even though she was quite noticeable. "Dennis," I called my sister. "She's on her way," she said. "But it would have been better if you let me bring her over first. You men aren't great at setting up furniture." She turned around to look for something. "Bert, get off your lazy butt," she yelled at her husband. He was enjoying a beer and 2 donuts, happily chatting with the other guys. That was not the reaction I expected. Darn, I thought. Maybe I had somehow shouted that word on this bright, sunny Sunday when everyone except me seemed to be having a good time. I really believed it was the second option because almost everyone turned their eyes to me. The guy moved toward me quickly. "Good morning, neighbor," he said. His cheerful tone almost made me want to say, "Good morning," back to him. It felt odd. He got so close that I could smell his aftershave or cologne. It really suited him. He wasn't exactly handsome. His looks were just average. He had dark brown hair and nice blue eyes. He wore a Mustang t-shirt and black jeans along with black shoes and no socks. I think he thought he looked good, but there was too much black without any color to make it stand out. I chuckled to myself, realizing he addressed not to impress but to match his car. It was funny but also a little sad. Even though I didn't want to, I found myself thinking about what it would be like to kiss him. "Oh my God, she's beautiful," he said with excitement. I felt myself blush, but then I saw that he was staring at my car through the open garage door. "Can I?" he asked. "Can you what?" I shouted. "What do you want to do now besides waking me up so early on a Sunday morning?" "It's next." "I'm sorry," he replied. I saw his smile fade and he looked down. I felt bad, like I had hurt a puppy. "I did leave you a notice about this. My bad." Then he stepped back slowly. Most people can understand how others feel. As he moved away, it felt like he was scared of me. In that moment, I realized that the cheerful smile he wore was just a front, hiding that he was as troubled as I was. Once he got back to his friends, he smiled again. At this time, I could see the cracks in his happy facade. Men often don't notice feelings like this. They try to hide their true emotions. "It's always the pretty ones," he said with a shrug. The other guys went back to eating, drinking, and laughing, doing all the typical guy things. Guys," he suddenly said. "It's 11 o'clock. The game starts at 1. I have big pizzas coming at 1:15. We need to bring everything inside and set up the big TV in the next 2 hours or we'll miss part of the game." I'd never seen anything like it. Almost in unison, they finished their beers and rushed to their trucks to unload the rest of the stuff. As the group of men worked faster than before, I noticed him looking at me. "I really am sorry," he said quietly, just for me to hear. In that moment, I started to wonder a lot of things. I wondered if I could have handled things better. I wondered why, more than a year after my divorce, I was still so angry. I wondered if he actually thought I was pretty. But before I could think more, my neighbor Ernestine Briggs, who everyone called Ernie, came into my view. "You're quite a piece of work," she said with anger. "Ever since you moved here a year ago, everyone has been nice to you. Once we realized you didn't want to be friendly, we left you alone. We try not to bother you because we got the hint that you didn't want to be part of things. We don't invade your space, but we still look out for you. We don't invite you to neighborhood parties because you've made it clear you don't want to be included. Heck, we don't even let the kids go to your house for Halloween. We also put up with the fact that you hardly ever cut your grass and let leaves pile up until they blow into other yards. But what you just did," she shook her head as if trying to hold back her frustration. "Ernestine was one of the first people in the neighborhood to say hello when I moved in. She was the caring type. She was nice to everyone, so it was unusual to see her upset. Unlike when you moved in," she said coldly. "He didn't just drop in out of the blue. He told everyone when he was moving. He even came to a meeting to introduce himself to those who didn't know him." "But I didn't know," I replied. "I don't go to those meetings." She pointed at a bright blue paper stuck to my screen door. "Maybe that's why you were out here in the day wearing such a thin robe," she said. Seeing her head in disappointment, she turned and walked back to her house while some men hurried around me, thinking about football, pizza, and more beer. I walked back to my porch and took off the bright blue paper. "Hi, my name is Dennis Miller. I'll be moving in on Sunday. I'm really sorry for any noise while I move and will try to keep it short. Feel free to drop by and say hi or have a snack. You don't have to help, but help is always welcome. Thanks for your kindness." I then wondered why I hadn't seen the flyer before. I realized it had probably been there for a few days. I ignored it, thinking it was just another notice for a bake sale or a boring school play that someone's kid was in. I went back into my house and soaked for the rest of the day. I made a pot of coffee and watched from my bedroom window as a bunch of people moved my new neighbor in. It took me weeks to move all my things. I had to hire people several times for the larger items I couldn't carry alone. After a year, I still had things in boxes or items that needed to be put together. Most of the time, I just didn't bother. For the first time, I wondered why I was still living like this. What would it take to make this house my home? The life I had left was gone and I didn't want to go back. This was now my home, whether I liked it or not. I wondered if my anger would ever fade or if I would always feel this way. People often say that our life and experiences shape us into who we become. I'm not sure when it happened, but my life had made me kind of mean. It was 3 days before I saw him again. I heard him coming and going a few times that week. The loud sound of his car was easy to recognize. Normally, he would drive up his driveway and into his garage. He had one of those motorized fences and an electric garage door that opened on its own. The door shut right after his car was inside. On Wednesday evening, I noticed that after he got home, he went out again. When he returned, he had a stack of bright blue papers. He walked up and down the street, knocking on almost every door and talking to the people who answered. If someone wasn't home, which only happened once when I was watching, he taped the flyer to their screen door. He made a big rectangle path, and I knew I would be the last house he visited. A lot of the neighbors invited him in, so it took him about 2 hours to finish the whole block. I felt nervous waiting for him to knock on my door. I checked the clock and saw that it was getting dark. I guessed someone probably asked him to stay for dinner. Then I noticed he had already gone home. I knew this because I could see the lights flickering on and off in his house. When I looked through my front door, I noticed a bright blue flyer taped to my screen door. I opened the door and quickly took it down. This time he was letting everyone know he was digging a pool in his backyard. He expected it to take 2 weeks with the loudest sounds coming from the digging machines in the first few days. The noise would be loud again when they poured the cement. He wanted to keep the noise in the neighborhood down, so the workers would only work from 10 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. They would work part of the time on Saturday, but would not work at all on Sunday. I had a feeling the Sunday part had something to do with me. He was also inviting everyone to a pool party when the pool was finished. I wondered why he didn't knock on my door. I realized I was the only one he hadn't talked to, aside from the person who wasn't home. It bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Then something else caught my attention the next Saturday. Since I worked during the week, the pool digging didn't bother me at all. I could see his backyard from my upstairs window and watch the progress, but I never heard any noise while I was home. That Saturday, I woke up and went for a walk in the woods. After that, I did some shopping, and when I got home, I was surprised. My grass was freshly cut and looking neat. It looked amazing. I just stood there staring at it. Seeing how great it looked made me realize for the first time how bad it had looked before. It wasn't hard to find out who had done it. He lived right next door. While he wasn't the only one on our block who had cut his grass that morning, he was the only one who had edged it. I was about to walk over to his house and yell at him, but then I stopped. I thought about whether that was really what I wanted to do. After a moment of thinking, I chose to handle it differently. I walked over to his house instead. I knocked on the door and heard a voice tell me to come into the backyard. I let out a frustrated breath and tried to calm myself. I walked around to the back and my jaw dropped. In the 2 weeks since he moved in, the yard looked so much better. Before it had seemed empty and plain for over a year, but now it was changed. He had put down new grass everywhere except around where the pool was being dug. There was still a strip of bare soil about 2 feet wide all around the yard. It seemed like he planned to add flowers or bushes there. A tall privacy fence was already up, but he seemed to care more about how it looked than about privacy. The pool was fully dug and the thick plastic liner had been placed inside. It was bigger than I expected, looking long enough to swim laps in. I noticed 3 workers in the pool. 2 were setting up pumps and hoses, while the third was drilling a hole that looked like it might be for the main drain. Dennis was busy too. He was working hard. One minute he was laying stone tiles from the edge of the deck down to the pool. The next minute he had parts for a hot tub that he was setting up on the small deck. I almost stepped onto one of the thick tiles he was putting down, but stopped just in time. He glanced up at me and smiled. "You can step on it," he said. "That's what they're for." I stepped onto the path of tiles and got a surprise. The tile wasn't stone at all. It was a very convincing rubber piece. It felt soft under my feet. I couldn't help but smile. "There's no digging or hammering going on," he said. "Did you think the noise was bad?" "I'm not really here about the noise," I said. "Did you cut my grass? Did I cut it in a way you don't like?" he asked. "Is it too short or not how you wanted it?" "I'm more interested in why you did it," I replied. "2 weeks ago I ruined your Sunday morning," he said. "And folks in the neighborhood were upset about your grass getting out of control. It was a hot topic at the last block meeting. I thought I could fix 2 problems at once. I could make up for disturbing your peace and help calm down the unhappy neighbors. No one gets hurt and everyone feels good. It's a good deal for everyone. Unless I just wanted my grass to grow freely," I said. "Maybe I wanted a more natural look instead of a perfectly cut lawn like in the suburbs." "Oh no," he said. His face showed shock. He looked so surprised that I almost laughed. Up close, he actually looked kind of handsome in a rugged way. "Calm down, cowboy," I said. "I was just too busy to cut it. And about you ruining my Sunday, I guess we're even." "Wait," he said as I started to walk away. "Did you see the note I left on your door?" he asked carefully. "The one about the pool and the party?" I replied. He nodded. "Look, I should tell you, I really don't do parties or being with a lot of people. I honestly don't like being around others at all. So thanks for thinking of me, but I'll have to say no." I turned to leave again. "Wait," he said again. I turned back to him, trying not to smile this time. He ripped a piece of paper from the tile wrapper and quickly wrote something on it. He held it out to me. "You don't have to come to the party," he said, "but you can use the pool whenever you want. Just call me and I'll leave the gate open. I won't even come out until you're finished." I was surprised by his offer. I didn't know if I would use his pool, but soaking in that hot tub after a long hike sounded amazing. "I'm not promising anything," I said, but maybe he nodded. "By the way, are there any chores at my place that you'd really like to handle?" I asked. He nodded with a smile. The way he looked at me made me feel strange. I could feel my heart racing. "I'd love to wash your car," he said. That feels a bit too personal," I laughed. "We'll have to get there slowly." I took one more look at the beautiful place he was making from that barren yard and shook my head. He really wasn't that bad for a guy. Once I got back inside my house, I crumpled the piece of paper he gave me and threw it in the trash. But on a sudden thought, I fished it out again. I took a few minutes to save the number in my phone, then I tossed the paper back into the trash. "Sarah," my stomach felt uneasy. I knew I should eat something. What was that saying? Eating for 2? Well, one of us didn't want to eat, so the other would have to deal with it. If Dennis were here, he would have made sure I ate. He would have insisted if he had to. But that wouldn't have been needed. My last 2 pregnancies were happy times. Dennis had always been there, caring for me, and making it feel like bringing a baby into the world was a beautiful experience. We would talk for hours about how special our baby would be, picking names and arguing about it for weeks. But this time was so different. I was all alone. No one was happy about what was happening. People I met either looked down on me or laughed. Everyone in town seemed to be talking about it, and now that people knew I was pregnant, I felt even more judged. Before this, I was seen as someone who broke a family and made a good man unhappy. Now I was blamed for ruining Brad's life too. I didn't even get to tell him myself. The news had spread, and he came to my door, screaming and calling me names. He shouted and demanded that I get an abortion before it was too late. Eventually, he went from shouting to begging. It was sad to see. In that moment, I realized how foolish I had been and how wrong I was about my choices. If you asked anyone in town, they would quickly say I had cheated on my husband. They thought of me as a bad person, maybe even worse. But the truth was different. I might have wanted someone, but the idea of being with anyone else made me feel sick. Another thing people got wrong was thinking I cheated on my husband with another man. The person in front of me crying and whining was not a real man. He had a grown man's body and looked like one, but that didn't mean he acted like one. A real man would take responsibility. Even if he didn't want to be with me, he should care for his child. Saying Brad was a man was unfair to my husband and men everywhere. I had thrown away a chance for true love with a man who cared for me for some quick moments with someone who couldn't handle it when things got tough. Brad was brave enough to be with me, but not brave enough to face his actions. And while Dennis, my husband, was strong enough to think about our children's needs, he even thought about the possibility that the baby could be his, and felt sad it wasn't. Life would have been much easier if the baby were his. I was sure that Brad would be a terrible father. He was not ready or willing to take on the role. On top of that, he was out of work and had no plans for the future. What was I thinking? Everyone else seemed to be doing fine, except for me. Brad's girlfriend was attractive. She found out how terrible he was and quickly moved on to a better guy. Brad's friends thought he was great. Chelsea seemed to be getting even closer to her dad, if that was possible. I overheard her chatting with her friends on the phone about how much she loved his new home. She called it her house because he filled it with everything she wanted. She had asked him for a pool, and just 2 weeks later they were building one. Even Dennis found something to focus on to get over me. He didn't talk to me. It felt like he was avoiding me. Whenever he dropped Chelsea off, he left before she even got in the house. The only way I knew he was there was by the sound of his car leaving. If I was smart, I would just go through with the procedure and try to win my husband back. The strange thing is, even with the DNA results, I felt that this was Dennis's child. Because of that, I had to keep the baby. I knew Dennis would love this child just like he loved the others. That thought stayed with me, but I didn't dare tell anyone, and that was part of my problem. I doubted everything I did because recent events showed me that I didn't know what was best for me. My fling with Brad made that clear. Jamie. I was walking along one of my favorite trails. It was one of those special fall days. The leaves had changed into beautiful shades of orange and red. It was just a perfect day. I even had a little secret. A few days ago, after hiking, I had used Dennis's hot tub. My legs ached from a tough hike. I saw him leaving just as I arrived, so I hopped over the fence into his yard. The pool looked amazing. The grass around the stone tiles was soft and felt nice under my feet. I climbed up the wooden stairs to the deck. The wood felt good under my bare feet. It was clear that Dennis had picked everything in his yard with care for comfort. I looked around to see if he was nearby. The tub was already bubbling. I wondered how sneaky I was being. Did Dennis know what I was doing? Was he getting ready to come back? The thought of him bringing another woman to enjoy his yard made me feel something unusual. I think it was jealousy. I swung my long leg over the side of the tub. The warm water felt amazing against my skin. It wasn't hot. It was just warm, wrapping around me like a soft, comforting blanket. I let out a deep breath as the warm water covered me up to my shoulders with just my head sticking out. My sore back legs and shoulders felt so much better. It was like parts of my body that I didn't even know hurt were thanking me as I fully relaxed. I realized I would be using this tub often. I felt bad for not telling Dennis about it. I felt like a jerk for using his... What was it? For a moment, I almost forgot Dennis was a guy. He was like all the others. They always wanted something and weren't honest about it. Then I heard a sound. I checked my watch. I could not believe it. More than an hour had gone by since I got into the tub. That tub felt like a time machine. I heard the familiar sound of Dennis's Mustang. I quickly jumped out of the tub, grabbed my towel, and ran down the stairs. I used one of the trash cans to help me over the fence between our yards just as Dennis drove in. I raced up the stairs, leaving a trail of water on the steps. I peeked down into his backyard and saw it. As I mentioned before, some men can be very unpleasant. Part of me hoped Dennis would be different, but I knew better. Nobody is without flaws. We all have secrets. Now I knew what Dennis was hiding and why he needed that tall fence. Dennis drove his powerful Mustang into the yard and the fence closed behind him so nobody could see his car. His garage door opened and he parked the car inside. Away from watchful eyes, Dennis got out of his car with 2 young women. They were laughing and joking as they walked into his house. I felt angry watching him. Part of me was relieved, but another part felt crushed. Deep down, I really wanted him to be different. 20 minutes later, the 2 girls came out onto his deck. They looked like they wanted to show off for Dennis. They were both in swimsuits and were very different from each other. One had brown hair and was slimmer. She looked like she was only 17 or 18 and still growing. Her friend, the blonde, was tall and curvy. Her curves were bigger than mine, and I am much older. The way she walked showed she probably had more experience than I ever had. Her swimsuit was quite revealing, while the brown-haired girl wore a more modest one-piece suit. The blonde jumped into the pool and came out shivering. She ran back onto the porch, and I couldn't help but laugh. The girl clearly forgot it was November, even though the weather had been fairly warm. She joined her friend in the hot tub. Dennis stepped out onto the deck and put a pizza on the table. The girls squealed with excitement and began to eat the pizza. The blonde girl was especially lively. It seemed like she was really trying hard to impress Dennis. For some reason, she leaned way forward to pick a slice. This made her shirt pull tight, and it looked like she was trying to get his attention. It was so obvious, like she was jumping and shouting, "Look at me!" But somehow Dennis didn't seem to notice. This made me angry. He clearly liked the quieter girl more. There seemed to be a connection between them. The other girl was probably there to add some fun. I turned away in disgust and promised myself I would never talk to him again. I felt a mix of happiness and disappointment. I made myself a cup of tea and thought about everything. It hit me that I thought about Dennis a lot. There had only been one other man I had thought of this way, and I had married him. I realized I was relieved to think Dennis might be a bad guy. I needed a reason not to let myself like him. I was let down because, in a way, I had started to see him as part of my life. I switched off the lights in my house and sipped my tea while I looked out the window at Dennis's house. Who's the strange one now? I wondered, as I watched his bright windows. Was I curious about Dennis with the two girls, or had it been so long since I had been close to someone that I was just wishing for excitement? One by one, all the lights in his house went out except for one. I peered in and saw just the two girls. They were both wearing nightgowns, laughing and doing something on the computer. Where was Dennis? Something felt wrong. It was strange that he didn't spend time with them. He brought them food and then just left. Could he be asleep? Why would he pay for their company and not enjoy it? Something didn't add up. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a faint light coming from the back deck. I hurried to my bedroom where I could see the deck, and there he was. Dennis, alone on the deck. And suddenly I felt like I understood something about him. Maybe it was a feeling I picked up from the way he was standing. I could feel that Dennis was sad, even if he didn't say it out loud. I wasn't the only one who noticed. I saw the smaller girl get up from a chair in the room, leaving the other girl at the computer. I knew right away where she was headed. I quickly ran to my side door. It faced away from Dennis's house. I opened it and slipped out quietly. I moved carefully around my house until I was kneeling by the fence as close to Dennis's deck as I could get. I heard the girl open the sliding door and step onto the deck. Then I heard something that almost made me shout in surprise. One question changed everything. "Daddy, why are you out here crying in the dark?" she asked. "I thought you were done with her. She's not worth your tears. That's why you divorced her. You have to get over this. You can't let her ruin your life. What do you always tell me? You have to move on and live your life." My mind raced. I needed to escape. I quickly backed away from the house and went back inside. I yelled in frustration as soon as the door closed behind me. I was really losing my mind. Why was I trying to find something bad about Dennis when he had done nothing wrong? The girl was not a bad person. She was his daughter. The other girl was just one of her friends. The older girl was in that awkward stage of being a teenager trying to figure herself out. Dennis didn't pay her much attention. Their talk on the porch revealed something important. I could understand what Dennis was going through. He had just come out of a messy divorce. From his daughter's words, it was clear he hadn't done anything wrong. It was also clear that no matter what the woman had done, Dennis was trying hard to start fresh, but he still had not fully moved on. We had more in common than I had thought, but we were different too. Dennis was pushing forward and trying to create a new life. He got a new house and worked hard to make it a nice place for himself and his daughter when she visited. He made an effort to know his neighbors and build new friendships. He treated everyone kindly, hiding his pain behind a happy smile. He took all his sadness on himself. I was different. I hid behind a mask of anger. I took out my pain from my divorce on every man I met. I unfairly blamed all men for what too had done to me, twisting my feelings into hate for all of them. The biggest difference between Dennis and me was that he was brave while I was scared. He tried to jump back into life while I stayed away from it. He wanted to make new friends, but I shut myself off from everyone. If we kept going our separate ways, our futures would look very different. Dennis would find another woman and start a new life with her. I would be alone, living like an angry old lady with too many cats. Sarah life felt like it was getting better. Too bad no one was around to enjoy my jokes. I decided to visit my next-door neighbor for coffee. I thought it was time for me to stop hiding and start fixing my life. I didn't need to hide anymore. Everyone in town already knew or thought they knew what was happening in my life. Rhonda and I had faced much worse together. Our friendship could handle this. I walked out of my house and knocked on her door. I heard her moving inside. When she opened the door, she saw me and looked surprised. "Hi, Ronnie," I said. "I thought I'd come by for—" I paused when I saw her surprise turn to disgust. "Why?" she asked. "Well," I smiled. "We usually have coffee a few times a week. What I mean is, how could you do that to Dennis, Sarah?" she exclaimed. "You cheated on him with a kid. Now you want that kid to help you raise your, baby," I said. "It's a baby, Rhonda. The baby isn't to blame. Brad is over 18. He's an adult. He can vote, get married, and even get a loan. But somehow, it's all my fault, right, Rhonda?" Once we started, he really wanted me. But it's funny that even though there were two of us, everyone wants to blame me for what we both did. I was not thinking straight, Ronnie. I'm getting older just like you. I'll be 40 soon. And while your husband seems old, Dennis is getting more energetic. Did you know some of Chelsea's friends have crushes on him? He's never noticed, but they do. The only person who ever had a crush on me is my husband. I feel so big. I have curves. My stomach is not flat anymore. What would you do if a younger guy started to flirt with you? At first it felt good, and I laughed. Then I wanted that attention. I showed a little skin, just my legs and a bit of my chest. We all do it, Ronnie. Before I knew it, we were having sex. But that's all it was, Ronnie. Just sex. You know he never kissed me? I never kissed him either. I never wanted to. We didn't think about growing old together or having a family. When I gave in the first time, I meant for it to be just once. The rest is history. You should know that he used me just like everyone thinks I used him. He should have to change his life the way I am changing mine. It's not fair, Ronnie. I lost my husband, my family, my home, and even my kids' respect while he goes off with different women. I get labeled a bad person while he is called a good guy. How is that fair? I don't care what happens to Brad, Ronnie. He took Dennis from me. I love Dennis, Ronnie. Notice I said love, not loved. I still love him today, and I always will. I hope with all my heart that one day he can forgive me and give me another chance. But right now he is just too mad. The man I love threw me aside and started fresh. Did you know he has another house? Did you know he put in a pool and a hot tub? Dennis is moving on without me. What will I do if he starts dating someone else? Sarah, this is all your fault, she said. It's easy to say that Brad could make his own choices, but remember you are almost twice his age, so you are just as responsible for your choices as he was for his. You talked about getting older and Dennis staying young. It sounds like more nonsense. Dennis stays fit because he runs and works out, but you said it yourself. He never looked at another woman. Didn't you just mention that some of your daughter's friends? Those young girls had crushes on him and he didn't even notice them? He loved you, Sarah. And honestly, I hope he finds someone else. Stop acting like the victim. You can only blame yourself for what happened. Think about it. Once you started cheating, why didn't you think about using protection? Even if you didn't think you could get pregnant, you could still have given Dennis something. Brad dates everyone he can. Be responsible for your actions, Sarah. Nobody in this town feels sorry for you. If anyone deserves pity, it's Dennis. Then she closed the door in my face. In the following weeks, I faced rejection everywhere. I couldn't even talk to Brad about our child or our options. I tried to talk to his parents, but they didn't want to hear from me. When I mentioned that I was carrying their grandchild, the mother turned on me. "How do we know that?" she spat. I was stunned. "I had a DNA test done," I replied. "We know that," she said. "Everyone knows it was the talk of the town. But your DNA test only showed that Dennis is not the father. It didn't show that Brad is." My mouth dropped open in shocked. But I said shocked. "But nothing," her husband replied. "How do we know Brad was the only one you cheated on Dennis with? You need to stop telling people that Brad is the father of that child until it's proven. If you don't, we'll get a lawyer and take you to court for lying." "You can't take me to court for that," I shouted. "Dennis hired a private investigator. He has video of Brad and me together. I can show that we were with each other. Can you prove he was the only one?" He shot back. "I've heard of other guys who say they—" I ran out the door. What he said was just not true. I admitted to cheating on Dennis, but it was just one mistake, not who I really am. Brad was the only person I had ever cheated on Dennis with. My life seemed to be getting worse and worse. Surprisingly, I turned to the one person who always supported me. I called Dennis. He always had time to talk. I told him how I was being treated and how much I disliked it. He listened and even gave me advice sometimes. His best advice was to ignore the people in town. He said they would eventually forget. He also told me that looking back would only make things harder. I needed to think about the future. Even though his advice sounded wise, I learned from my daughter's angry outbursts that Dennis was also struggling to move on. Just last week, Chelsea came home looking for a fight. She was good at upsetting her father, but I could see through her plans. My daughter thought she could get me to argue, so I would kick her out. Then she could go live with Dennis, which is what she really wanted. But she ended up giving me a clue that brought me some hope. During our fight, she mentioned seeing Dennis on his porch crying. Even though he told me to look ahead and forget the past, he was having just as hard a time as I was. I took a moment to think about my life. I had messed up my marriage to a point that might be very hard to fix. But if I worked on the problems one by one, maybe there was still hope. It would take time. But time was all I had. The first thing I needed to do was take care of the baby. As my daughter pointed out, one reason Dennis would talk to me on the phone but wouldn't come into his own house was that seeing me with a big belly from another man's child was really difficult for him. It brought back too many memories of how I had hurt him. The odd thing was that now I knew whose child it was. If I could have, I would have stopped the pregnancy right away, but now it was too late for that. I would have the baby and then find a new home for it. It would be better for everyone involved. I know it's not right to blame a baby for my problems when it hasn't even been born yet, but I had my own goals. My main goal was to get Dennis back. No one seemed to want this baby. I didn't want it. Dennis had said the same thing. If I hadn't gotten pregnant or if the baby was his, we might have had a chance. Brad didn't want it either. He was denying that the baby was his and avoiding me. When Brad's parents, the baby's possible grandparents, didn't want anything to do with it. The best choice for everyone would be to give the baby up for adoption so it could have a family who truly wanted a child. Then I could focus on getting Dennis back. Jamie, after I messed up, I stayed away from Dennis. I felt so silly every time I looked at him. When I thought about his kindness, I felt bad. He was everything I should have been. He had been through a divorce too, like me. But instead of feeling sorry for himself and hiding away, he jumped back into life. I saw him sitting on his porch crying. That showed me he had faced tough times just like I had. But he worked hard to move on. Being around him made me realize I hadn't tried hard enough to deal with my own issues. I also felt sorry because Dennis had always been kind to me. Even after my angry outburst when we first met, maybe I just wasn't ready to move on yet. Someone heals at their own pace, and maybe it wasn't my time yet. Perhaps it was better for me to be alone for now. That Saturday morning, my life began to change. I was out hiking in a hard part of the woods I had never visited before. A small creek ran through it, with water still flowing even though it was November. Usually it would be frozen by now, but this warm November weather worked out for me. I took in the fresh air, free from chemicals or car fumes. As I walked by the creek, I hopped from rock to keep my nice hiking shoes dry. That was all I remembered. I must have slipped on a rock and hit my head. When I woke up, I was wet and freezing. I also had the worst headache ever. I took out my phone and called 911. They asked if I was safe and where I was. When the operator found out I was in the park and safe, she transferred my call to park services. But due to budget cuts, they didn't work on weekends. The recording told me to leave a message and they would return my call. I was alone. My foot was stuck between two rocks and my ankle was hurting. Thankfully, the cold water likely kept it from swelling too much. But it still hurt a lot, and for some reason I couldn't reach it. Then I remembered my phone. I looked at my contacts. My mom and sister were in another state. They couldn't help. Then it hit me. I didn't have any friends. Well, I had one person who seemed to want to be my friend, so I had no choice but to call him. "Dennis, this is Jamie," I said. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I need a favor." "Sure," he said. I almost hung up. He was so nice and wanted to help me. I felt bad. "Where are you?" he asked. "I don't know." I told him my situation. His reply showed me he was not just kind, he was really smart. "Okay, your phone works and you have a good signal," he said. "What kind of phone is it?" "It's an old iPhone," I replied. It's an iPhone 5. I didn't want to get a new one. He laughed. Go to the iTunes store and download one of those geocaching apps, he said. Then call me back. If you're on AT&T, you can keep talking to me. I checked the apps and chose one of the free ones. Why am I doing this? I asked. And I should say my battery is low. Then we need to hurry, he said. I heard some noise in the background. What are you doing? I asked as I watched the app download. Coming to get you, he said. It sounded like he was heating up a meal in the microwave. Then I heard a car door slam. I got it, I said, feeling proud. I didn't even know why I was doing this. I had no clue what geocaching was. Open it, he said. Of course, I said with a hint of sarcasm. I couldn't help it. Okay, look at the screen, he said, ignoring my tone. There should be a series of big numbers. Read them to me slowly. I did what he asked and felt good about it for some reason. Now what? I asked. Now talk to me, he said. I shared how scared I was. I was alone in a big park and hadn't seen anyone since I woke up. You have other things to worry about, he said. Like what? I asked. I would have come to get you anyway, he said. But you asked me like it was a favor. That means you owe me and you don't know what I might ask for. What you're doing is, I started. I stopped. I felt too emotional, then I just said it. I'd do anything you want. Oh, that was not something you should have said, he joked. You're a tall, pretty redhead. I could think of so many things. I was trying to think of a clever reply when my phone warned me that the battery was almost dead. You think about what you want, I said, aware of my hint. I'm going to turn off the phone to save the battery. Please hurry, Dennis. You have a big area to search. I knew it would probably take Dennis a while to find me if he could. Then I remembered I hadn't told him where to start looking. I decided to just take a moment to relax. He knew he had to get to the park, but first he needed to drive there. It would take him a few minutes to arrive. I wasn't sure if it was my sore ankle or the cold water that made me sleepy, but soon I dozed off. When I woke up, only a little time had gone by. I felt hands touching me. Then I was lifted and placed on a soft cushion. As I opened my eyes, I saw Dennis looking down at me. He helped me sit up and handed me a warm cup of coffee. I took a sip and felt thankful. He then wrapped me in a big, fluffy towel. I'm getting out of the Jeep. You can change out of your wet clothes and put these on, he said. They might be too big, but they're clean and will help you warm up. I quickly took off my wet top and undergarments. I slipped into the thick sweatshirt he had left for me. I took off my shorts and put on the sweatpants, pulling them over my legs. Then I put on the warm socks. I knocked on the window and Dennis returned. He took all my wet clothes and the towel I was in, placing them in the back of the Jeep. He then wrapped me in a big blanket and laid me down in the back seat. He gave me a couple of pills for the pain in my ankle and then got in the front seat. We started driving. Dennis, where are we going? I asked. To the hospital, he replied. You need some x-rays. Where did you get the Jeep? I asked. It's my winter car, he said. It has four-wheel drive and keeps my Mustang safe from snow and rain. After that, I dozed off again. I was still asleep when we parked the Jeep. Dennis wrapped the blanket around me and carried me into the emergency room like a baby. He placed me in a wheelchair and pushed me to the desk where he signed me in. Then he wheeled me into a treatment area. One good thing about being in a small town is that there weren't many other people there. He talked to the nurses and the doctor, but never left my side. He watched as they took the x-rays of my ankle. He held my hand and chatted with me to keep my spirits up while we waited for the results. Where are my shoes? I asked. In the back of my Jeep, he said, with the rest of your wet clothes. Then I remembered that the warm clothes I was wearing belonged to him. Don't worry, he said. I'm sure they can be washed and we'll be fine. It would be a shame to lose those clothes. Oh no, I shouldn't have said that. So you like women's clothes? I asked. Can we talk about something else? He replied. Nope, you brought it up, I joked. His words bothered me. What's so special about those clothes? I have many like them. It's not about the clothes, he mumbled. It's the way Dennis just told me, I urged. I started to worry again, but maybe I was wrong about him before. I really needed to find out if Dennis secretly liked wearing women's clothes. I had been tricked before. Okay, he said, but you're just going to get mad at me again. We were getting along well. I don't want to mess that up. Just tell me the truth, Dennis. I said sharply. All right, he replied. I don't care about your outfit. I can't even remember what color it was. What I liked was how good it made you look. Those long legs and that cute shape were driving me wild. I can't help it, Chame. I'm a guy. I'm sorry if this ruins our chance at being friends. I laughed so loudly that everyone in the waiting room turned to look at us. Dennis tried to pull his hand away, but I held on tight. A few minutes later, a doctor came over. I have good news and bad news, she said. But it's not that bad since he carried you here and still can't let go. She smiled and sat down next to me. Your ankle isn't broken? That's the good news. The bad news is that it's a bad sprain. You need to stay off it for 2 to 3 weeks. After that, you might need some physical therapy. But in 3 weeks, probably just after Thanksgiving, you'll forget this ever happened. At least you were smart to go hiking together. I wouldn't want you out there in the woods alone. Have a nice evening. Wait, I said. What do I do for 2 to 3 weeks? Enjoy it, she said with a smile. Let your husband pamper you, and it's a doctor's order. Don't put any weight on that ankle, or you might end up back here needing surgery, and trust me, that surgery isn't pretty. They use a lot of pins to fix things. She shivered at the thought. And those orthopedic guys? She shivered again. They are like the car mechanics of surgery. It's better to just take it easy. Once you have screws in your body, you'll have pain all the time. Your hiking days will be over. You'll be lucky to walk without a limp. She smiled at me again and leaned in to whisper and looked at him. He's just like a big puppy. He wants to take care of you, so let him. When she walked away, I turned to Dennis. You carried me into the hospital? He nodded. There were no wheelchairs in the parking lot, he said. As he gently helped me back into the wheelchair to go to his car, I thought back to another time. I remember a moment with a different man during a terrible stomach problem. That time, I was married to him. He spent the whole time in the emergency room on his phone, telling everyone we knew that he had brought me there. He called all his friends and many of mine. He even called my parents and his. He was so busy calling people that he didn't notice when they moved me to another room and gave me treatment for food poisoning. It seems that the new restaurant that he wanted us to try used some bad ingredients that upset my stomach. When he finally got off the phone and came to see me, he chatted with the nurses. He found out what happened to me and then started calling everyone to tell them about it. He spent more time on the phone than he did with me. Dennis stayed by my side the whole time. I thought about that as he drove us home. He carefully placed me back in the back seat, wrapping me in a warm blanket. The car's movement and the pain medicine they gave me made me sleepy, and I fell asleep before we got home. I did remember him saying he would get my car. I think I laughed when he joked about leaving my Mustang alone in the woods. Hours later, I woke up and my ankle hurt so much that it was pounding. I tried to reach for my bedside table, but it wasn't there. I felt scared and confused about where I was. I relaxed and noticed I was on a big soft bed with a thick blanket. There was a table beside the bed, but it was on the other side. I saw a lamp and found the switch at the bottom. I turned it on and realized I was in a man's bedroom. There were big posters of Mustangs on all 4 walls. "Dennis!" I called out. He came into the room a few moments later looking like he had just woken up. "Dennis, why am I here?" I asked. He yawned and sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm supposed to take care of you," he said, yawning again. "I didn't have your house keys, and you never said I could go into your house." "Dennis, who said you were supposed to care for me?" I asked. "The doctor did," he said. "Remember? You need to rest your feet for 2 to 3 weeks." "Dennis, my ankle hurts a lot," I said, "and I'm hungry." He left the room and came back a few moments later with some pills and a glass of water. "What do you want to eat?" he asked. "It doesn't matter," I replied, "as long as it's quick." In about 5 minutes, he returned with a tray that had soup and a salad on it. I took a spoonful of the soup, and it was really good. There were big pieces of meat and a thick broth with lots of vegetables. A drop of soup fell down my chin and onto my shirt. Dennis took the spoon from my hand and started feeding me like I was a child. I remembered what the doctor said about him wanting to help me. Maybe I had been alone for too long. Usually when someone does something nice for you, they want something in return, but in that moment, I decided to just accept his help. I would do anything Dennis asked of me. I was a bit unsure, but I really needed his help at that time. 3 days later, I realized I was in a tough spot. I had to leave that house for my own peace of mind. Dennis was just too nice, and I worried that if I got used to it, I might get hurt again. I had been hurt before, and I promised myself it wouldn't happen again. Dennis had called the hospital to learn how to help my injured ankle. For the first 3 days, he put ice on it 3 or 4 times a day. I didn't like that at all. Then he started to soak my ankle in warm, scented water. I liked that. But what I really liked was when he gently rubbed my aching leg. I didn't expect it, but soon I began to not just enjoy his help, but to want more of it. So I took advantage a little. I pretended my ankle was worse than it was. I could have gone home after the first week. Dennis started to go back to work, but he still came home every day at lunch to check on me. I was never alone for more than 4 hours. Even when I could walk a bit, I didn't want to leave. We did the silliest, most fun things together. We watched the first snowfall while wearing swimsuits in his hot tub on the deck. He had a fire pit that kept us warm. Dennis always came up with ways to keep me entertained. One evening while we were playing Scrabble, I asked him, "What do you want for your first favor?" He replied, looking puzzled. "I owe you a favor for picking me up," I said. "I think I owe you another for taking care of me." "Okay," he said with a smile. "Dinner." "That's too easy," I laughed. "We have dinner every night. A favor should be something you really need me to do." "I want a nice sit-down dinner with the most beautiful redhead I've ever seen," he said. That's when I felt torn inside. I was suddenly in a battle within myself. Part of me thought Dennis was the one I wanted to be with forever. The other part warned me that I had been tricked before and that if I fell for it again, I would lose my mind. "Are you talking about me?" I laughed. "Hey, me, I don't know any other redheads," he laughed back. "Honestly, I enjoyed having you here. Your ankle is getting better fast. Soon you'll be home, and I hope we can still hang out." "Dennis, you fool, we'll always be friends after this," I said. "I know I can be a handful, but I appreciate when someone has my back." We looked down at the floor, and I felt something was changing. "Hi, me, I'm divorced," he said. My divorce looked simple to everyone watching from the outside, but it broke my heart. I'm not like you, Chame. I'm not confident or sure of myself. I loved one girl for 20 years. She was the only one for me. When I found out she was cheating, it almost shattered me. It hurt even more to learn that the guy she was with is only a year older than our son. Now, she is having a baby with him. I could kick her out of my life, but I can't remove her from my heart. I walked around trying hard to pretend I was okay, hey me, but it felt like it could really kill me. I wanted to stay positive. I had to do that for my daughter. For her sake, I could not fall into sadness and anger. But then something happened that made me think I could have a future. At first, I felt a strong attraction. I mean, you're beautiful. But these last few days, I've seen the real you when you lower your guard. Chame, you can't hide it from me. There's a sweet girl in there beyond the tough exterior. "Should my dress be short or long?" I asked. "Sorry, I guess I'm boring you," he said. "I tend to talk a lot sometimes. I felt so empty for a long time, and you came along like a bright star in my dark night, so I end up going on. Should my dress be short or long?" I asked again. His face lit up like I had never seen before. It really surprised me. Not even my husband had reacted like that. "I don't know," he said. "Let me think for a moment." I watched as he considered the options. "Okay," he said. "With a short dress, we can see your lovely legs, but if it has ruffles at the bottom, it might cover your backside. But you're so beautiful. I can't decide." For the first time in a long while, I felt excited. I think it was just because he seemed so amazed at the thought of going out with me. "Dennis, I will surprise you." I said his happiness was infectious. The next day, I went back to work. After lunch, my boss called me into her office. "Welcome back," she said. "How's your ankle?" "It's getting better every day," I replied. "Seems like that's not the only thing," she remarked. I looked at her confused. "I've heard from several coworkers today that you were actually nice to be around. Someone even said they caught you smiling." I laughed when she said that. "Cammy, you know you're fully covered under our health plan, right?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "When someone is sick or hurt, I usually call the hospital to make sure they got paid. The insurance can make them jump through a lot of hoops to get their money. We live in a small town and the hospital doesn't have many resources. I usually pay the bills and then ask the insurance company to give us the money back. So I was surprised when they told me your husband had used his credit card to pay the bills right away. I thought you two were divorced. I started laughing when it hit me that the doctor must have handled the paperwork. The more I thought about it, the better I felt. Dennis had stepped up and done what was needed. I told her my thoughts, and soon she was laughing too. Then she looked at me. "Are you talking about Dennis Miller?" she asked. "Is he the engineer at the big factory just outside of town?" I nodded. "You know him?" "Yep," she said. "My brother helped him with his divorce, but you probably know all about that. That guy is too nice sometimes. He even let his ex-wife stay in his house until their daughter moves out. He should have kicked her out after what she did to him." The rest of the afternoon, I couldn't wait for the evening. I left work early to get my hair done. It was funny. I had to ask a coworker where to go. I had lived in this town for over a year and had never gotten my hair cut before. The woman at the salon was really friendly. She had many ideas. She wanted to straighten my curly hair. She even thought I'd look great as a blonde. In the end, I just got a wash, a deep conditioning treatment, and a trim. I could hardly wait to get home. I had driven 50 miles to the nearest big city to shop at the mall and find the perfect dress. I told the woman at the store about my situation. "So your guy doesn't know if he likes your legs or your backside better, huh?" She laughed. "That sounds like a nice problem to have. My husband barely notices me. When football season starts, I become a football widow. From August to February, I'm lucky if I get any. Unless I put the TV on the headboard and style my hair like a goalpost." She laughed again. "I think I have just the dress for you," she said. "It will make your pretty eyes pop and show off your slim figure and long legs without being too frilly." Back at home, I was feeling nervous. I was a bundle of jitters. It got my mind racing. I had only one serious relationship before just like Dennis. Would this time be good for both of us? As I waited for him, I thought about how I never expected to need a second chance at love. While I put on the last touch of my makeup, Dennis arrived. I called his phone and told him the door was open and he could come in and wait. I could hear him moving around downstairs as I put on my shoes. He sounded just as nervous as I was. I smiled at that thought. And then another thought came to me. What if he didn't like the dress? My ex-husband was always harsh about how I looked. Dennis had made it clear what he liked before. I got angry. I thought, forget him. I put a lot of time and money into looking nice. If he couldn't see that he could just deal with it. I was so mad that I stomped downstairs and even left my purse behind. And then there was Dennis, acting like he was asleep on my sofa when I came down the stairs. "Dennis!" I called out loudly. He pretended to wake up, but when he saw me, everything changed. It was clear he was surprised. His mouth dropped and he looked speechless. He just stared at me for a long time and then his smile turned into a serious face. "What's wrong, Dennis?" I asked. He had the same look my ex always had when he pointed out something he didn't like about me. That's when I was about to tell Dennis to stop. He finally spoke. "Are you sure you really want to be with me?" he asked quietly. He looked at the floor and the TV, which wasn't even on, but not at me. I knew something was bothering him. "What's wrong, Dennis?" I asked again. "Shame, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he said. "I've told you how pretty you are before. I thought you would look nice all dressed up, but I didn't expect you to look like you belong with a movie star or a hot guy on TV." "Dennis, I'm going out with the really hot guy next door," I said with a smile. "Are you ready?" His reaction made me feel amazing. I felt like a star. It had been ages since someone appreciated me like that. Then I realized I had left my purse upstairs. I turned to grab it and heard Dennis gasp. I looked back and saw his mouth open and his eyes wide. "Dennis, were you looking at my backside?" I asked. He nodded like a boy caught sneaking cookies. "Sorry," he said. "Only my backside better be the one you're looking at," I told him. I went to get my purse, and when I returned, he was still waiting for me. "So, where are we going?" I asked. "I made a reservation at a restaurant," he said. "It's a bit far, but I think it's perfect for that dress." He was almost out of breath and couldn't stop staring at me. It felt great to be with a man who found me beautiful. As I got ready to leave, I noticed how amazed Dennis was. He usually seemed so cool and relaxed. He was usually ready and calm, but this time he seemed off. "Dennis, what's in that box?" I asked him. "Huh? What box?" he replied. "The one on my dining room table that wasn't there a couple of hours ago when I had a snack," I said, pointing at it. He stared at the box as if he was seeing it for the first time. "Oh, that," he said, sounding worried. "It's nothing. Don't worry about it." I walked over to the table and picked up the box. When I opened it, I found a lovely corsage inside. It looked like something boys used to buy for their prom dates. "Dennis, this is beautiful," I said. "Is it for me?" He nodded, looking nervous. "I know it's cheesy," he said. "It's just that—" And then he stopped. "What is it, Dennis?" I asked. "I guess I wanted you to know how special I thought tonight would be." "It's cheesy, don't think about it," he said. "My ex had never done anything like this for me, even during our prom." I started to feel that Dennis was more nervous than I was. "Dennis, can we just pretend that I'm the same girl you rescued and cared for?" I asked. "Just pretend it's a normal night and I'm about to beat you at Scrabble. That's only because I let you win," he joked. "Not true," I said. "I win fair and square." "Yep, because I let you use words like flobidia," he said. "We both know that's not a real word." "It should be," I smiled, taking his hand. "Dennis, where should I wear my corsage?" "How about on your wrist?" he asked. "How about on my chest? Near my heart?" I smiled. He looked so nervous that I laughed. "I guess you just noticed that I have curves too, huh?" "How about here?" I said. I took the ribbon meant for my wrist and used the comb in the box to attach the flower to the side of my head, where it blended with my long red hair. A little later, we were in his Jeep driving on the freeway. After a bit, my hand reached out and held his. In the dark car, I looked over at him. As we went under a light on the freeway, the inside of the car lit up for just a second, and I saw his smile. For over a year, I had been stuck looking back at the past with anger and had forgotten about what was next. Suddenly, I realized I had a future again. As we drove, we talked about anything and everything. Dennis asked me many questions and answered mine. Each time he discovered something new about my life, he stored it away as if it were important information. Then, we saw a big white building. I tensed up as we drove by, but then Dennis took a sharp turn and pulled into the parking lot. "Dennis, are we going here?" I asked. "Do you know what?" "La Chateau Blanc," he said. "It's supposed to be. Isn't that the most expensive restaurant in the state?" I said. "Maybe even in the whole area?" "No way. You can't just walk in here, honey. They are full for months." "I know," he said. "I made a reservation." I was shocked. I thought we would go somewhere cheaper and less fancy. As we entered the restaurant, Dennis held the doors for me and showed how polite he was. I looked around and saw people I only knew from TV. There were a couple of state senators and the local news anchor sitting nearby. Right across from us was a famous actress who had just moved here and was running for mayor in a nearby town. She wore a dress that probably cost more than my house and showed more skin than anyone would expect. Every time she laughed loudly, half the people in the room turned to look. Some men stared, hoping to see something more, but through it all, Dennis only had eyes for me. Dennis kept surprising me all night. He did little romantic things that showed he liked me, and he was such a gentleman. I felt so happy until I went to the bathroom just before we left. An older woman was sitting in front of the mirror putting on her lipstick. "Honey, I'd love to be you," she said. "Why?" I laughed. "I'm not the prettiest woman here." "She not," she replied honestly. "But don't get me wrong, sweetie, you're pretty. Every man wants something different. Some like women with big curves, others like blondes or women from different backgrounds like Asians or black women. I know some guys who like goths or those tattooed women who look wild. I wonder how they will look when they're older and their skin wrinkles and the tattoos fade. Or what happens when tattoos go out of style. Other women are starting to move away from them and, oh, those people with piercings. But some guys find that attractive. There's a guy out there for nearly every woman, honey. But you have a good one. My husband and I watched you two the whole time. He never took his eyes off you. To him, it was like you were the most important thing in the room." "I want a big bet with him, you know," she said. "How?" I asked. "When you get to my age, you find ways to keep life fun. I doubt you two will ever get bored, but we like to play games. My husband bet me $100 that your man would look at the actress like all the other men in the room within 10 minutes. It never happened. That guy only has eyes for you. In a room filled with very rich and famous people, I was the only woman that caught his eye. I hope you're going to do something special for him tonight," she said with a smile. Her words made me feel good. "I think I'll treat you to dinner tonight," she added. "This week will be quite dull after seeing the two of you." "Do you eat here often?" I asked. She nodded and let out a big yawn. "I have to, dear," she replied. "I own this place. Don't let that guy get away. He's a great catch. And don't play any games. There are plenty of girls who would take him to bed without a second thought and leave you alone. It sounds nice to have morals, but when you're by yourself, they won't keep you warm." She smiled and walked out of the restaurant. Suddenly, I realized I was in trouble. I had been tricked again. Anger made me shake. Dennis was waiting for me when I finally calmed down and left the restroom. He had a strange look on his face. "Jamie, they didn't charge us for our dinner tonight," he said. "And a really nice lady gave me a card with a special number to call if we ever want to return. You're my lucky charm." I stayed quiet. I knew that in less than an hour the dream would end. The good feeling I had enjoyed for days would be gone, leaving me feeling even worse than before. Dennis drove us home and didn't seem to notice how quiet I was about the evening. It was the best night ever, but it also felt terrible because I was realizing the truth. I was still processing the fact that I had been fooled again. Dennis walked me to my door like a true gentleman. He took my hand and looked deeply into my eyes. I looked away and opened the door. "Where are you going?" I asked him. "I was hoping for a good night kiss," he said, sounding disappointed. "But it looks like you're not in the mood." "You can have all the kisses you want when we're together," I snapped back. His surprised expression almost made me laugh. "Huh?" he replied. I took his hand and pulled him inside my house, closing the door behind us. "You've been talking about my looks for days now," I said. "Do you just want to stare?" He seemed speechless. I took his hand and led him to my room. "Sorry for the mess," I said. "I didn't expect this to happen tonight. We don't have to." He started. "Yes, we do," I insisted. I pulled off my dress and let it fall to the floor. It had cost me 2 weeks of pay, but I treated it like it didn't matter. I dropped my bra next to it, and his eyes widened as he looked at me. I turned around and playfully shook my hips, then took off my underwear. He had never seen any woman act like this. "Jamie, are you okay?" he asked. "Dennis, do you like me?" I asked. He sighed. "Jamie, this is real," I said. "Tell me the truth. No lies. Jamie, I'm not sure you want to hear this, but while you were with me, I think I fell in love with you," he said. My mind was telling me to be careful, but my anger was louder. "So it's more than just liking." "I love you, Jaime. Then come over here and be with me," I said sharply. "Jamie, are you drunk?" he asked. "No, Dennis. It was a simple request," I replied firmly. "If you want to see me again, get in this bed." He quickly took off his clothes and got into bed with me. I reached out to him. I had only been with one man before, and I thought I would need to do more to get him excited. But as soon as my hand touched him, he was ready. He pushed me back and moved in closer. Dennis leaned down and began kissing me in a way that felt foreign and exciting. My ex would never have done that, but Dennis seemed to love it. It had been a long time since I felt anything close. I didn't last long, and it felt amazing. Before I knew it, Dennis was with me fully. He was moving quickly, making me feel a lot. I started moving against him. "Please, Dennis," I pleaded. He continued, building up quickly. We were both sweating. We didn't say much. It felt like we both needed to prove something. Suddenly, he had a look on his face that I hadn't seen before. I felt a rush of warmth, and it was too late to worry. I felt something deep inside me, and it was intense. I realized how connected I felt to him. I wasn't sure what to say. I had thought I knew him. I looked over and saw something in his eyes that made me nervous. He flipped me over, and fear crept in. I thought he might be aiming to do something else. My stomach twisted at the thought, but I was wrong. He returned to where we started, and I felt pleasure again. I let go of my worries, and joy filled me. Then it got even better when he touched my sensitive spots. He continued to move against me, and I matched him perfectly. It felt like everything was alive inside me. My whole body was buzzing with energy. I felt like I was shining. Then it happened. Just when he let out a heavy sigh and fell on me, he released a flow of something. It seemed like he had been holding it for a while. At the same time, I had my own rush. Every nerve in my body lit up. It was the strongest moment of joy I ever felt. It was even more intense than the first time we had been together that night. I fell back on the bed completely spent. It was the best time I had ever had. It felt like the first time I truly experienced that kind of connection. I slept most of the night because I was so tired. When I woke up, I was alone. I looked over at Dennis's house, but all the lights were out. I guess he was as tired as I was. I missed him. I wondered why, after such a lovely night and all the nice things he had done, he didn't want to stay with me. He seemed like the kind of man who would hold his woman close after being together. I thought about why he had rushed home. As I drifted off again, I told myself we could talk the next day. We had the whole weekend to figure things out. I wanted to tell him that what happened the night before was kind of a test. I needed to know if we were a good match before we moved forward because I was starting to really like him, too. Maybe I could find a way to say it without it sounding like a test. When I woke up later, everything clicked. Dennis had his daughter with him. He probably went to pick her up early and didn't want to wake me. I wondered if he would want me to meet her this weekend, but the whole day went by and he never came over. I called him, but he didn't answer. I texted him, but there was no reply either. When I thought I had waited long enough, there was a knock on my door. I rushed to the door and opened it, hoping it would be Dennis. Instead, a very angry teenage girl who looked like him was standing there. "Wow," she said. "You really are as pretty as he said." She shook her head, then added, "What is your problem?" I was shocked. No one had ever talked to me like that before. She pushed her way into my home. "Do you know how much you messed this up?" she yelled. What?" I replied. "He was finally doing better," she said angrily. His laughter and happiness were coming back. "I didn't mind sharing some of my time with him to help you heal because I thought you were good for him, but I don't know what you did and now he's a mess. Stay away from my dad or I'll make you regret it." Then she turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard I thought it might break. I sat on my sofa and cried the whole night. I knew I had a real problem. After my marriage fell apart, I was lost in anger and sadness. I felt trapped in my own hurt. Then Dennis came into my life. He was like a ray of sunshine, helping me find my way out of the dark place I had fallen into. Even though he was just starting to come out of his own struggles, he had decided to pull me into a better place with him. But somehow I ended up dragging him down into my darkness instead. It was easy to give in to sadness and doubt. It was hard to fight my way back to hope. I really wanted to believe in a brighter future, but I couldn't allow myself to be fooled again. The pain from before was too much to bear a second time. The hardest part was that I knew. Deep down, when Dennis told me he loved me, I sensed he was different. I wanted to believe in that love. I loved him too, but my anger took over. I felt like a fan at a concert shouting that I wouldn't get tricked again. But I did get tricked. I tricked myself. I took something real and beautiful, something probably better than anything I had ever known, and I messed it up. Even now, through my tears, I can see the spark in his eyes when he first saw me in that dress. I can still picture his smile when he sat across from me. I should have understood then. He even said those words clearly. He opened his heart and said, "I love you, Cham." I knew he meant it. I knew he wasn't lying, but my anger wanted more proof, so I pushed him away, and I ruined it all. I often wonder what he thinks of me now. It was Sunday morning when I noticed him leaving his house. I peeked out my window and saw him taking his daughter somewhere. He returned about an hour later. As he stepped out of his car, I rushed out to meet him. I didn't care that I was just wearing a thin robe and it was late November. "Hey, me, you need to go back inside and put some clothes on," he said, his voice flat. All the joy he usually brought was gone, and I felt like I had taken that from him. I couldn't let him go. I needed him like I needed air. "I needed a favor," I said. "You once told me we'd always be friends no matter what. Even when I was difficult, you were kind to me." I was crying so loud that I was sure the whole neighborhood could hear me, but it didn't matter. Even if others wanted to laugh at me, all I cared about was the man in front of me who was trying to pull away. "Hi, me, go home and change," he repeated. "I'll come over later." "Dennis, no," I said loudly. "I have to fix this. I need to make things right between us. I belong with you. That's what I really want. You told me something the other night, and I need to tell you too. I love you too, Dennis. I know I reacted badly after our date, but if you let me explain, maybe you'll see. Please let me talk to you. If you truly feel about me the way you said you did, you'll give me time to explain." We sat down on his big comfy sofa, and I told him everything. I shared my life story. I talked about my divorce and why it happened. I explained my sadness and how he helped me feel better. I also told him how scared I was that the sadness was coming back. I shared my regrets and how I cried when I realized what I had lost. "You can't lose me, silly," he said. "We're both a bit broken. It will take some work. But if you're willing, I think we can be happy together." I curled up in his arms and yawned. "Once you get enough sleep last night," he laughed. "I actually didn't sleep at all," I said. "I was too busy crying about you." He held me close, and I felt loved and safe. I don't know how long I slept, but it must have been hours. When I woke up, he was still there, holding me like I was very important to him. He lay beside me, watching me. It seemed like he wanted to remember every part of my face while I slept. When I looked at him, he smiled. Our faces got closer and closer until we kissed. It wasn't just a quick kiss like the ones my ex gave me. I could tell Dennis enjoyed kissing me. We kissed more and more until it felt really special. Then I suddenly realized my robe was open and he was kissing gently. It was not like before. He was very soft. My body seemed to respond to him. Soon I was asking him to come closer to me, but he was so gentle and patient that it felt magical. Our actions were not rough as they had been the first time. They were caring and sweet, and in the moment it felt so much deeper. When I felt the wave of happiness, I wished it would never stop. "I love you, Dennis," I said, and I really meant it. Sarah, by the time Thanksgiving came around, I was as big as a house. It was the hardest pregnancy I ever had. I also found out that Brad had left town. His parents said they didn't know where he was. He was over 18 and could go anywhere he wanted. They looked at me like I had ruined their lives. My first 2 pregnancies had been happy times, but this one was terrible. I was all alone. Even Chelsea wanted to stay away from me. She kept talking about her father's new girlfriend. Nothing hurt more than hearing my daughter brag about her father dating a beautiful woman who lived next door. My heart broke, but deep down I felt like I deserved it. I had hoped that we could all be. I needed to give Dennis some space to understand that we should be together. Maybe staying with my parents for a bit would help both of us. I called a local adoption agency to take the baby right after it was born. I had always been a good mom, but this time felt different. I was unhappy with the baby growing inside me. I knew it wasn't the baby's fault, but deep down I kept thinking that if the baby had been Dennis's child, we would still be together. If Dennis had stayed with me, maybe my kids would have forgiven me too. To me, the baby stood for the end of my family. I couldn't separate the child from my choices that led to this. I had always loved Thanksgiving. It was my favorite holiday. Unlike Christmas, which was all about gifts, Thanksgiving was about being with loved ones. It was about sharing a meal and talking about what we were grateful for. A year ago, the 4 of us were happy together. Who would have thought that just a year later my family would be gone? When I first talked to Brad, I never thought his sweet words would lead to me losing everything I had built with Dennis over 20 years. No affair was worth that. Brad was not worth it. I woke up on Thanksgiving Day hoping it was just a bad dream. I went to the kitchen to make breakfast for Chelsea. I wished with all my heart that she would change her mind and stay with me. Maybe we could go out for dinner together. I went to her room ready to plead if I had to, but when I walked in, I saw she was already gone. I spent Thanksgiving all alone and sad. I had nothing to be thankful for. I ate tuna and crackers and wished more than anything that this was just a dream and I could wake up to none of it happening. "Jamie, I'm so sleepy," I said with a groan. "Jamie, we need to get up." "It's Thanksgiving," he replied. I opened my eyes wide. It was our first Thanksgiving together. It felt like my first Thanksgiving as an adult. When I was married, we always went to my parents' house for the holiday. "Oh no, Dennis. I have to put the turkey in the oven." We got along well because we both wanted the same thing, Dennis's happiness. "Jamie, is it okay to wear whatever for Thanksgiving?" she asked. "I need to prepare the turkey, Chelsea," I replied. "Just tell me what to do and I'll help while you get ready," she said. "Daddy went to the airport right after he woke you. He'll be back soon with someone." I appreciated her help, so I showed her what to do. Then I went upstairs to get dressed. I assumed Dennis had invited some family or friends. I took a quick shower and put on some clothes. Since I would be cooking all day, I wanted to be comfortable. I chose one of Dennis's shirts and my favorite jeans. Soon after, Chelsea and I were peeling and cutting potatoes while chatting about Dennis's favorite Thanksgiving foods when I heard the door open and voices in the living room. I went out to greet Dennis and his guests, and I was shocked by what I saw. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I asked. "Dennis invited us," she said. "We haven't seen you in over a year." "Who else is here?" I whispered, surprised. My mom looked surprised too while Dennis and Chelsea were taken aback. "Your sister came with her," Dennis said. "Is that a problem?" "No, it's fine," I said, feeling relief. "Wash over me." "I wanted to surprise you," he said. "I thought it would be nice to have some family here." "Baby, you and Chelsea are my family now," I said. For most of the morning, Dennis and my mom got to know each other. My mom had brought a photo album of my childhood. They sat at the table looking at each picture while she shared stories about each one. However, my sister didn't seem to enjoy things as much. "Why didn't you bring the other album?" she asked our mom. "You know the one with all the pictures of Jamie and Kurt?" I shot her a look that could stop her in her tracks. "There's no reason to talk about bad memories," I said. "Kurt is in the past. I knew my sister liked Kurt a lot, so I wasn't surprised she'd mention him. I think she was more upset about my divorce than I was and thought it was my fault. When we were alone, she reminded me of how charming Kurt was. As the day went on, she became bolder. "You're a nice guy, Dennis," she said to him. "I hope you're not hurt when Jamie and Kurt get back together." No one responded. I stared at her in disbelief. "I won't be seeing Kurt ever again," I said firmly. "Well, the devil must be skating on ice," she replied. "Jill, what are you doing?" I asked, confused. "Hey, me, don't get upset," she whined. "I did it for you." "What did you do?" I asked again. "I wanted to bring the family back together," she said. "So I told Dad your address. He'll probably stop by and—" "And what?" I asked. "Well, Kurt might be with him, so—" She started. "Chelsea, call a taxi," I yelled. "Jill, get outside and wait for your cab. You can't stay here anymore." "What, I did it for you," she whined. "Stop lying, Jill," I said. "You did it for Kurt. You've always had a crush on him. If you want to stay, call Dad and tell him not to come." She pulled out her phone just as the doorbell rang. I watched in shock as Dennis opened the door and let my dad and ex. He looked at me like I was silly and said, "Jamie's legs are better. He loves me, you know," I snapped. "I'm always going to be the one he picks. That's how it is. And I like it that way. I like normal Kurt, so get out of my kitchen, and if you want to help me, just leave." "I thought you lived next door," he said with a grin. A little while later, Dennis came in looking really worried. He took my hand and kissed my neck. "I love you, Jaime," he said. "I know, silly," I replied and pulled him in for a deeper kiss. I wrapped my arms around him and pressed close. He ran his hands down my back and grabbed onto me. "Oh, that's just great," my sister said. "What a nice guy showing affection right here in the kitchen where anyone could see. That's so caveman. Kurt never did that. He's more polite. He has better manners." "I guess you didn't see that I was hugging him too," I said. "It's called being in love. It's when you can't keep your hands off each other." "I think it's sweet," my mom said, smiling at us. "Well, Kurt never," Jill started. I said, "Sis, you don't need to try so hard to make me like Kurt," I said. "If you want him that much, he's yours. We're not married anymore, remember?" "Okay, let's just have a nice dinner," my mom said. Even though it was our house, Dennis let my dad sit at the head of the table. My mom sat on my dad's right side and my sister on his left. Dennis sat at the other end of the table with Chelsea on his left, and that put me next to my sister, with Kurt squeezed between us. As my dad started to say a prayer, I noticed Jill was trying to get Dennis's attention. I stood up and interrupted my dad. "What's wrong with you, Jill?" I yelled. I looked at Dennis and then back at Jill. "He was always saying how pretty you are," she stammered. "I just wanted him to know that when you leave him for Kurt, he could—" Kurt laughed. "My parents were shocked. He didn't do anything," she said. "When I tried to show him my shirt, he just left. I was just being friendly." "You mean person?" I whispered angrily. "Dennis, you should have told me this girl tried to flirt with you. I would have stood up for you," I said. "I didn't want to ruin the holiday," he said. "Besides, she's your sister. Who would you have believed if I told you? She would have said the opposite." "When you came into the kitchen and saw me talking to Kurt, why didn't you get upset?" I asked. "Because I love you and I trust you," he replied. "And that goes both ways, you know." I said, "Jill, get out of my house. Jamie, leave," my dad shouted. "No one got hurt." "Like Dennis said, it's a holiday. Let's just have a good time." "Forget it, Dad," I shot back. "This is my house." Dennis invited Mom for Thanksgiving. He talked to her while helping me with my hurt ankle. She called me and he answered my phone. Mom said she missed me and Dennis invited her to surprise me. To be honest, I have missed Mom. We talk on the phone often, but she never got me to come home and I didn't want her to visit. I knew if I went home I'd see you, Dad, and if she came here she'd bring you. I paused, anger bubbling up. Dad, you can't make rules in my house. You weren't invited. Mom brought Jill, but Jill wasn't invited either. Jill, who again wasn't invited, gave you my address, and you brought Kurt with you. I couldn't help but laugh at my own joke. Jamie, what's happening? My mom asked. Dennis stood next to me and hugged me. I felt better with him there. I sat down holding his hand. I reached for Chelsea's hand under the table, too. I've got your back, Jamie, she whispered. Jill, sit down, I said firmly. This is my fault. I should have spoken up sooner. Dennis knows this, but maybe everyone should hear why my marriage ended. We don't need to bring up the past, my dad said. You're happy with Dennis. You and Kurt were just too young, that's it. I should probably leave, Kurt mumbled. Stay put, I snapped. I looked around the table and started my story. I've loved Kurt for as long as I can remember, I said. He was strong and good-looking. Every girl liked him, but he seemed to like me. We were good friends. We never did anything physical. He always said he wanted me but could wait until I was ready. I told him I wanted to wait until my wedding night, and he said that was okay. When we turned 20, he asked me to marry him. I was so happy. I said yes right away. We were engaged a long time. We wanted to wait until we graduated to get married. Since we were engaged, I started suggesting that I might change my mind about waiting. I thought we were almost married, but Kurt was stubborn. He wanted to stick to my promise. You all remember what happened in my last year of college. I had to have surgery for a cancerous cyst on one of my ovaries. They removed both of my ovaries, and I found out I couldn't have kids. I gave Kurt his ring back, and he laughed at me. He told me if I wanted a bigger ring, I should ask. But other than that, I should just put the ring back on. I fell even more in love with him. I was as crazy about Kurt as you all think Dennis is about me. The doctors told us not to be intimate for at least 6 months after the surgery, so we planned to delay our wedding. When we did finally get married, it was a big and fancy event. We went on a cruise for our honeymoon. But our wedding night was not what I expected. It was disappointing. Kurt was having some issues. I thought it was my fault and wondered if he was scared of hurting me. But as time went on, things didn't get better. Kurt just couldn't keep an erection. Sometimes, during our best moments, he could manage to be inside me, but it didn't feel good for either of us. Despite that, I loved Kurt deeply. I thought that intimacy was just a small part of our relationship, and everything else was wonderful. Growing up, Kurt was the biggest, most outgoing, and most attractive man I had ever seen. Everyone loved him. Women wanted to be with him. Men wanted to be his friend. But I was the one he chose. Kurt always looked good. A few years back, he had a clean, shaven look, wore designer suits, and cared a lot about his appearance. Now he has a full beard and short hair, looking more relaxed. Being apart from Kurt for any time felt hard. If he was late for dinner, I worried he was with another woman. I feared he might be with someone who could give him the family I couldn't. I want to say it was all my fault. Kurt was always thoughtful. Whenever he was late, he would call and let me know where he was and say I could come meet him. We were hardly ever apart. The only time was during his yearly hunting trip with my dad. He always invited me to join, but I couldn't stand to see him hunt. My mom had told me it was very bloody and rough. She went once or twice when I was little and never wanted to go back. I decided she was right and believed Kurt would be safe with my dad. If any women were interested in him, my dad would make sure he behaved. This went on for years. Each year I missed him more. I know it was only 1 week a year, but the problem was with me. I give all my heart to those I love. Just ask Dennis. I basically live here now. I hate being away from him. That last year, after just 1 day apart, I couldn't handle it. I had always hunted at the family cabin far north. I called my uncle to find out where it was and used Google Maps on my phone to drive up and surprise Kurt. But when I opened the door to the cabin, I was the one who got surprised. That moment changed everything about my marriage. They had been so busy for the last day that they hadn't even unpacked their hunting gear. The cabin smelled bad and they were sweating a lot. Even now, if I close my eyes, I can still picture it. Kurt was frowning as he tried hard to do something. It was the same thing he always had trouble with no matter what I did. I stood by and watched as Kurt acted out, and then they switched places and Dad started doing the same with Kurt. I don't think they would have even noticed me if I hadn't gotten sick. I think it was because I realized how many times I had been close to the same thing that was happening. I threw up everything in my stomach while they looked at me in shock. When I screamed and ran away as fast as I could, I got back in my car and just drove. I drove home like I was in a dream. I broke every speed limit from the Upper Peninsula back to our home in Lansing. As soon as I got home, I packed my things and put them in storage. Then I checked into a motel. I looked online for jobs and sent in several applications. I took a job here so I could get away from Lansing. I divorced Kurt, but I never told anyone the real reason. I didn't want to hurt your marriage, Mom. You both have been together for over 35 years. I didn't want you to feel the pain that I felt. I also worried Dad would be upset. So, you see, Jill, there's no chance of me getting back with Kurt. If you want him, that's fine, but he's just not for me. Chelsea, I probably shouldn't say this, but I need a man who actually wants me. I don't want someone who thinks he's better looking than I am and isn't attracted to me. I don't want someone who turns away from me and can't even be close when I'm trying to be intimate. I don't have anything against gay men. I just don't want to be with one. The reason I dislike Kurt isn't because he is hiding who he is. It's because he used me. He pretended to be a strong man while keeping me from finding someone who would truly care for me. If Kurt had been honest, we would never have married, but we could have stayed friends. And that's my advice to you, Chelsea. Don't rush into anything. But when you find someone you want to be with, make sure to truly get to know them before you say I do. That idea about staying a virgin until marriage can lead to a lot of sadness. I took a deep breath and looked around the table. Dennis was looking at me with love in his eyes. Chelsea looked surprised, but was smiling as she glanced at Kurt. I could see that Jill was surprised and maybe laughing a bit inside about the idea of that strong man being hurt by my old dad. Jill looked totally lost. She didn't know how to take it all in. My mom was crying hard. Suddenly she got angry and rushed at my dad. She scratched his face with her nails and he started to bleed. "I'm sorry," he said. "I do love you, Janice. We have 2 kids. That means something, right? I wasted my whole life," she shouted. "It's all been a lie. You can't even do what a man is supposed to do." Then she tried to rush him again. "Janice, we just need to adjust to this," he said. "We've been together for over 30 years. We have so many memories, both good and bad. I was there for you and you were there for me. We can get through this, too. It was all a lie." My mom screamed. I feel like one of those sci-fi shows where the guy finds out all his memories are fake and he's not who he thought he was. All the people he trusted were never real. It was just a lie. "Look at our 2 beautiful daughters," my dad said. "Janice, they are real. We made them together. Sure, some parts of our lives weren't true, but most of it was. And until now, you were happy. Dad, you don't understand. She never got the chance to choose. She didn't know the whole truth," I said. "No one is saying that you being gay is bad. It's not your fault." "I'm not gay," my dad said softly. "Yes, Dad, you are," I replied. "I want a divorce," my mom said. "I want it now." Jill jumped at Kurt. "You horrible person," she screamed. "I can't stand you." "Dad, maybe you and Kurt should leave now before the snow gets worse," I suggested. "Kurt, take my keys," my dad said. "I need to be alone for a bit. Maybe I will take a train or a bus home." "Dennis, can you drive me to the airport?" my mom cried. "No, ma'am," said Dennis. "You should stay with us for a while." My mom started to cry and hugged him. Dennis took her upstairs and came back alone. He made her some tea and brought it to her. "I don't want tea," Jill said, tears streaming down her face too. "Come on, Aunt Jill," Chelsea said. "I have something that will help you relax. Have you ever been in a hot tub during a snowstorm?" "Dad, I have an idea," I said. "Wait a second." I went to the computer and canceled my mom's flight. The airline gave us a new ticket. I used it for my dad to have the same seat on the next flight. I also got Jill a seat on a flight on Sunday night so she could be back in time for work on Monday. I had the keys to the Jeep and was ready to drive my dad to the airport. But then Dennis took the keys from me and said he would drive. I kissed him and said thanks. I hugged my dad, and for the first time in a long time, I told him to call me. "Dad, I feel like a huge weight is gone. You were right. We will get through this. Our family might not be the same, but we can handle it. Maybe without all the lies, we will be better. Tell your mom I said he started. but when he saw me shaking my head, he stopped. "Not yet, Dad," I said. "Give her some space and time. Let her come to you." Dennis and my dad went out the door. I heard Dennis trying to talk about Mustangs and smiled. I really liked that guy. "You were right, Jamie," Kurt said with a smile. "We will get through this, and it's shut up, Kurt," I said angrily. "Get out of my house before I call the cops." But he stammered. "I thought now that the lies are over. This isn't about you being gay or hiding it," I said sharply. "Kurt, for most of our lives we were friends. Okay, you hid being gay and lied about it. There are millions of gay guys out there. You're a good-looking guy and people like you. Why did you have to go after my dad? You pretty much ruined my family, and I can't forgive you for that. Your dad came after me." He whined. "You said no to me enough times," I shot back. "There were nights I begged you. I wanted to do things for you, but you always had an excuse." I smiled at him. "Kurt, Dennis and I are great together, and he loves it." I could see Kurt looking a bit sick. I thought he might be about to throw up, but I wasn't done with him yet. "You also went after my sister, didn't you, jerk?" I said. "You fooled her into being on your side. What was your plan? Was she going to be your next shield? Was she going to waste her life protecting your fake image?" "We were just friends," he said. "He's lying." Jill cried. "He told me he needed to know it was over with you. He asked me to help him try to get you back. He even said I should go after Dennis. His plan was to get caught, and then you would break up with Dennis and go back to him, but Dennis loves you too much. He just left when I started to unbutton my blouse." I turned back to Kurt. "Get out of my house," I said. "If you were a real man, but never mind." I pulled my leg back and kicked him hard. While he was yelling and holding his stomach in pain, I pushed him out onto the porch. That was when the healing started. Jill went back home on Sunday. Mom stayed with us for almost a month before she moved out. She hired people to help move her things from Lansing to our town. Mom found a new hobby. She was working on the flower beds in our yard inside the fence. It made me happy to see her and Dennis working together in the yard. Mom didn't have to go far. She took over the rent on my house, since I never stayed there. After Jill got a job nearby, she moved in with Mom. Dennis and I got married just after Christmas. We chose that date because we wanted to be married soon, and his divorce was final on December 26th. Mom divorced my dad, too. She even took him to court for hurting her feelings and tried to sue him for lying. Our family still has problems, but we are trying to fix them. To show our support for our new family, we all came together for New Year's. I met Dennis's son, Frankie, and his girlfriend. I made sure they knew they were always welcome in our home. Chelsea moved in with us after Dennis did something really nice. Dennis gave his ex-wife their old house. She sold it and left town to start fresh. Sometimes she calls Chelsea, but Frankie still acts like she doesn't exist. About a year after our wedding, I started to have really bad stomach pain. I went to the doctor right away. I was scared that the cancer had come back. It seemed so unfair to finally be happy and have it all taken away from me. Luckily, it turned out to be nothing serious. My doctor said I was so in love with Dennis that my body thought it was ready to make a baby, even though I couldn't anymore. He suggested some medicine to help. One of his colleagues had another idea. "You and Dennis are the happiest couple I know," she said. "Why don't you share some of that happiness? Instead of taking medicine, let your feelings guide you." 3 months later, Dennis and I became the talk of the town again. We went to a local adoption agency about 40 miles away. We fell in love with a tiny girl who was about a year old. We spent a few weeks visiting her and playing with her. We were sure she was the one for us. The lady who ran the agency looked shocked when we filled out the papers. "Are you sure you want this child?" she asked. "Yes," we both said quickly. "Dennis, I can't tell you anything about the child's birth parents." She said, "It's against the law, but in this case, I think you deserve to know." "Don't say anything that could cause trouble," Dennis replied. "We already know. She has her mother's eyes." "You mean her ex-mother's eyes, sweetie," I said. "I'm her mommy now." Epilogue. Sarah, it had been 4 years. It felt like a long time, but those years helped me grow stronger and discover who I really was. When I was at my lowest, the person I hurt the most did something kind for me. My husband looked past his own pain and gave me his house. Our divorce agreement let me live in the house, thanks to Dennis's suggestion, until our daughter was grown. Dennis let me sell the house and keep all the money. This gave me a chance to go back to school and start my life over. I studied computers and medical billing. I didn't take enough computer classes to become a tech expert, but I learned enough to fix most computer issues myself. I set up my own medical billing business that I could run from home. While I was studying, I had enough money to travel in the summers. I visited many places and met many people. While I wasn't looking for relationships, I had the chance to meet a few men. I was no longer married, so there was nothing holding me back. I dated guys of different sizes and backgrounds. At one point, I realized how silly some of my choices were. I even tried some group situations and was curious about being with women, but I learned that most of it felt the same. Often, the men were just using me. If a chance was there, men would take it. Just because they showed interest, it didn't mean I was special or loved. What I had done with Brad was a mistake that didn't matter to anyone now. I saw young men dating much older women. For many men, it was all the same. The only way I could find what I truly wanted was to win my husband back. 4 years had passed, and I felt like a different, stronger woman. I sensed that Dennis had moved on from the pain of what I did. I also figured that people in our small town had new stories to talk about. My daughter Chelsea never talked about her dad or his life when we spoke. She always protected him. But she did mention that he was with different women now, like Jamie, Jill, Janice, or Samantha. I understood more than anyone else could. I felt ready to return. I could start as his friend, then find my way back into his heart. I could make my way through the other women and reclaim my family. It might take longer to get Frankie on my side. I wasn't even invited to his wedding, but the key was getting Dennis back. The thing I never found with anyone else was love. No one made me feel that way like Dennis did. I'm not a big girl, but I do have a big butt and big boobs. Many men see me as someone to be with for a night and then forget about. Dennis was different. He made me feel like I meant everything to him. I really missed that feeling and wanted it back. One day I called my daughter Chelsea. She was 20 years old now. I had just arrived in town. Things were very different, especially with the new short-term rentals that had popped up just outside town. I'm not sure who thought of the idea, but it's smart. Short-term rentals are like a mix between a motel and an apartment. You can rent one for a week or stay for up to 3 months. You get your own kitchen and other nice things. It's like having your own apartment for a little while. I wanted to have lunch with Chelsea and catch up, but my daughter had classes all day and plans for later. She promised she would come by during my visit. I sighed, realizing she was now a grown woman. She had her own life, and it would take time for me to find my new place in it. I started unpacking my clothes. I went into the kitchen to check what appliances I had. Then I decided to go out to buy some food. I thought it would be fun to go to the market I'd been banned from before. I looked around for the owner but didn't see him. However, I did see someone I recognized. Mary, who used to date Brad, was in the manager's office. She was about 23 or 24 now and had gained some weight. Her face was still pretty, but she had a bit of a stomach now that her cheerleading days were over. On her desk was a picture of her with a plain-looking guy and 2 smiling little kids. She noticed me as I pushed my cart past her office and did a double-take. I nodded, and she smiled and waved. A few moments later, while I was looking at fruit, she walked up beside me. "It took me a while to recognize you," she said. "Are you going to kick me out of the store?" I joked. "No, that's old news. I'm married now and very happy. I have 2 kids, too. My husband loves me and stays true to me. I could never have that with Brad. You heard what happened to him, right?" "No, I've been away and didn't really care," I replied. "He left town to escape you and his responsibilities," she said. "Since you never sued him or asked for child support, he had a clean record. He joined the army but was still causing trouble. He got involved with another soldier's wife. Before they could charge him, he got hurt in a training accident. He lost one leg above the knee and his arm on the same side. His face was badly scarred, too. For the first year, he was very angry. I heard that both he and his parents tried to find you, but they didn't succeed." "Why were they looking for me?" I asked. "Brad can't have kids anymore," she said with a slight smile. "Your baby is their only grandchild." "What does that have to do with me?" I replied. "I put the baby up for adoption. I don't even know if it was a boy or a girl, plus they promised me that Brad wasn't the dad. They thought if you helped them, they could go to court and ask for a DNA test. They hope to get people on their side," she said. "They're really desperate. Why don't they just adopt the child?" I asked. She burst out laughing, then grew very serious. Her eyes were darting somewhere behind me. She said for over a year that poor girl was in an orphanage. Then she was legally adopted by a couple in town. A year later, Brad came back home. At first, he acted like a jerk and his family didn't even think about her. They only became interested last year, but by then she had been with her new family for 2 years. Brad never signed the birth certificate, and there was no DNA test for him. The baby's new parents are her real legal parents. Even if Brad could prove he was the father, he wouldn't have any legal rights. The adoptive parents won't let Brad or his parents see her. They even got a restraining order against them to keep them away. As she spoke, her eyes grew wider. Then a lively little girl bumped into my leg and tried to hide behind a big fruit bin. She picked up a peach and bit into it, giggling. A tall, slender young woman came up behind her and lifted her up, peach juice dripping from her mouth. "Samantha, you know you're not supposed to run off by yourself," the young woman said. When I saw her, my mouth fell open in surprise. I realized who she was. The young woman was my daughter, Chelsea. I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was long and curly. I'd only seen her with short, straight hair before. She must have been babysitting to earn some extra money. But as I looked closer at the squirming little girl, I noticed they looked so much alike. There was no doubt that the girl she was holding was also my child. "Chelsea," I called as I stepped closer. "I thought you had a date after school." "I never said that," she replied. "I said I had plans. My study group is meeting at Dad's house. They like to use the pool and hot tub. I came shopping so we'd have food and snacks." "Can I hold her?" I asked. Chelsea's eyes narrowed protectively. "Mom, I'm not sure," she said, not sure of what a voice said from behind me. "Let me guess. You're not sure if you should tell me that your sister has been sneaking off to eat fruit again, right?" I looked at the woman. She was slender with red hair. Her skin was very light and didn't tan. For a slim woman, she had nice curves. Her nose had some freckles, and she always had a bright smile. What surprised me most was when my daughter said, "Mom," my heart dropped. She suddenly looked at me, then at Chelsea, and back at me. "I can see why he loved you for so long," she said. Even though her smile stayed bright, I felt some strength in her. This woman was ready to fight for her man and her child. But then she did something different. She gently took the giggling little girl from her big sister's arms and handed her to me. As I held the little girl who didn't know who I was, a warm feeling spread through me. This lovely child was part of me. No paper or rule could change that. She was my baby. She squirmed in my arms without even looking at me. "Mama Peaches," she said, "we need to get peaches. I like peaches. Let me go, lady. Mama." This hurt more than Chelsea's polite words. The little girl didn't feel connected to me. She wanted the redhead to buy peaches more than she wanted to meet her own mother. She reached for the redhead, almost pulling herself away from me with all her strength. She wanted her mother, and I wasn't her mother. The redhead took the girl back, breaking my heart. She kissed her daughter and smiled. "Sammy, you taste like peaches already," she said softly. "Go get some for us to take home." "Come on, Chessie," she shouted, already running away. "Mama said we're getting peaches." My older daughter quickly followed. I knew she wanted to leave the awkwardness just as much as her sister wanted the peaches. When I looked back at the redhead, she surprised me. If I were her, I would have just said goodbye with a smile and maybe added "nice to meet you" as I walked away. But she was writing something down on a small pad she took from her purse. "It takes her a while to warm up to people," she said. "If you want to spend more time with her, come to dinner. Dennis would probably like to see you too. I can't promise you that Chelsea will be available much, though. She and her friends have unusual study habits, but it works for them. Sammy is 4, so she usually falls asleep in her daddy's arms by 730 or 8. So I'd come early if I were you." As she walked away, I noticed something special about her. She had that unique charm that Dennis had. Maybe it rubbed off on her. She took the time to say hi to everyone she passed. She clearly loved her life. 2 hours later, I drove up to a lovely house. It was the best house on a street with many nice homes. I heard voices from the backyard, so I knocked on the back fence. It opened smoothly, moved by a strong motor. It felt like something Dennis would have, so he wouldn't have to get out of his Mustang to open the gate. The backyard amazed me. Flowers and bushes surrounded it completely. The green plants covered the tall fence, making it feel like a pretty little spot in the middle of a thick forest. I felt calm, happy, and loved. There was a nice pool surrounded by stones that led up to an awesome deck. The wood was smooth and stained. On the deck there was a big grill, a hot tub that could fit at least 4 people, and a large fire pit. In the hot tub were 3 young women. One of them was my daughter Chelsea. They were taking turns reading from a book. I almost laughed at the thought of calling that woman my daughter's mom. It was a strange way to study. One girl read aloud while the others sat back enjoying their drinks. I smiled when I saw little Sammy in the hot tub with them. They had a booster seat for her. She jumped out, shivering from the cool air, and ran across the deck to get something from a table near the grill. She grabbed a glass of milk and dashed back to the tub. "Forget it, Samantha," Chelsea told her. "If you spill milk in the hot tub again, Daddy will be really mad at me. I won't spill it, I promise," she pouted, looking upset. My daughter gave in easily. "Okay," Chelsea said. I could see how this would end. Someone would be cleaning the hot tub soon. Suddenly, I heard a loud engine. My heart raced as I recognized the sound of Dennis's Mustang. The fence opened, and he drove into the garage next to another Mustang. Samantha, 1 foot in the tub and 1 on the chair, dropped her milk as she ran towards the garage, yelling, "Daddy's home!" Luckily, her milk fell outside of the tub. One of Chelsea's friends grabbed a towel and cleaned it up. Dennis got out of his car and picked up my excited daughter, who squealed in joy. Then Dennis saw me. He paused for a moment, but there was no anger on his face. He walked slowly toward me, holding Samantha in his arms. "I don't know what to say," he said. He moved Samantha to one hip and gave me a warm hug. There was no sign of anger in him. Samantha then spoke to me like we were old friends. "That's my daddy," she said. The way she said it reminded me of her mom. It had many meanings. It sounded nice, but the way she stressed the word in the middle showed she felt a sense of ownership and wanted to protect him, too. It was like this little girl who was only 4 was telling me that Dennis was hers. She was also letting me know she would take care of him. Then a red-haired woman came out of the house. She and Dennis saw each other at the same time, and any hope I had of getting Dennis back disappeared. I had once dreamed of getting older with Dennis, of us being 2 old people in love sitting together on a porch with our grandkids playing around us. Now I could see that Dennis might really be that old man on the porch one day. He would probably have kids running around from Frankie, Chelsea, and even Samantha. But I wouldn't be the one sitting next to him. That seat was taken. The hug and kiss they shared made the girls in the hot tub cheer. Samantha even reached out to push her parents' faces apart, then planted a little kiss on her daddy's cheek. Later, while Jaime and I prepared food in the kitchen and Dennis grilled outside, I asked her, "Jamie, do you think I could be? I don't know. Sammy's aunt? Sammy doesn't need more aunts," she said. My heart sank. Jaime was clearly protecting her family. "Look at all those girls on the deck," Jamie continued. "They're all Sammy's aunts. My sister is her real aunt. Frankie's wife, Millie, is her aunt. Sammy has too many aunts already." Her tone softened. "What Sammy could really use as a godmother," she said. "Would you be?" "Yes, absolutely," I said, wrapping my arms around her. "Sarah, Sammy is a handful," she warned. "I have really big hands for a woman," I joked. "I visit Dennis and Jamie often now. I always celebrate holidays with them, and I never miss my goddaughter's birthday. But I couldn't stay in that small town. Dennis and Jamie have their lives, and I really needed to start my own. Besides, it's a small town with a long memory, and I was tired of being the topic of conversation. I moved across the state to Lansing and got a good job at a hospital in the billing and medical records department. I've been on a few dates, but I haven't found anyone like Dennis. He was truly special. Most of the men I meet just want something easy. I've come to terms with the fact that by losing Dennis, I lost my chance at love. Recently, though, things have started looking better. I've gone on several dates with a strong, kind man who seems to be a real gentleman. I feel hopeful about our future together. His name is Kurt.